It was meant to be a joke, you know. Back in the day, me and my friends used to mess around with the spirits by scribbling questions in the sand and waiting hours for some sort of response. We'd draw letters on pieces of wood, trying to get answers. Supposed to be all fun and games, but we kept at it. Most of my buddies outgrew it, but there was this girl, way back when, that I think I had a thing for. This was ages ago, mind you. We just couldn't resist. It's like we were pushing our luck, looking for cursed spots, haunted houses, and places of power, but none of them delivered anything for us. Then one day we got fed up with some wishing well and decided to write in the sand next to it. She wrote something like, "I want to visit the other world," and I blurted out, "I want to be immortal so I can explore more stuff." We hightailed it back to our hotel that night, and I'll never forget, a massive storm rolled in. We kinda chuckled, thinking our messages would be washed away by the well's waters, and maybe that would make our wishes come true. We should have never laughed. She was gone the next morning, just like that. No one could figure out what happened, and of course I was the prime suspect. Even after they cleared me of any wrongdoing, my friends, her, my family, heck, anyone who crossed paths with us both pretty much labeled me as guilty. That's when I first tried to off myself. But I failed. I tried to hang myself from a tree. I was young and clueless, didn't know it hurt so bad, right before a storm hit. Yeah, it might have been a typical teenage stunt, but I was feeling exceptionally miserable, and the thunderstorms and those grim skies weren't helping. Lo and behold, a massive lightning bolt struck that tree, collapsing onto a house. I broke 4 bones and ended up killing 2 people. Every time I tried to bite the dust after that had the same result, someone leaping in front of danger just as it was about to hit me, or paramedics showing up in the nick of time before I crossed the point of no return after an overdose. I even bought a gun, aimed it at my head, and the blasted thing misfired. The absolute worst, probably, was when I decided to parachute from a plane. I prepared meticulously, took paragliding lessons, rented a parachute, did a bunch of jumps just to convince folks I wasn't planning something dumb. And on the day I finally thought I'd end it all, I snipped the parachute's cords and boarded the plane, only for it to malfunction once we were up in the air. The crash was a nightmare. Everyone, except me, perished. I ended up in the hospital for months, had to learn how to walk all over again, and to this day, I'm still not entirely back to normal. Turns out, I realized the deal was to stay alive, not thrive. I still suffer from massive headaches due to that near-death experience, and who knows if they'll ever go away. I'm also missing an arm, but still breathing. Found out this curse was stuck to me, so I cut ties with everyone. Found a secluded spot to pass on, and lived there in peace. Well, war came, and I ended up a prisoner of war. Let me tell you, they put me through some awful stuff, testing all sorts of things. By some accident, they discovered my immortality. My body kept rejecting whatever they threw at it, somehow surviving everything. The hypothermia tests were brutal, but then a fire broke out in the lab, wiping out all the researchers but sparing me. I got rescued by some higher-ups, some division or something. They experimented with drugs, something about preventing DNA damage. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. They were thrilled when I stopped aging. I was horrified, of course. It felt like science fiction, but it was real, and it was prolonging my suffering. They decided to try the drug on themselves, but none of them survived. Who would when your body sweats blood? So how did I survive all this? They dumped me on the streets, where I got found by medics. They had the right gear to keep me alive. Long story short, I started aging again. I was homeless when some billionaire found me. He's desperate to cheat death, paying big bucks to keep his medical procedures off the government's radar. Don't be fooled, this happens everywhere. I've tried almost every country. There are secret people with secret abilities. For me, it means they always have someone to experiment on, and it always works. I've accepted I can't die. But they don't know. Nobody does. When they back me into a corner like a lab rat, I find a way to trigger my curse. In my life, one thing's for sure. I can't die. So if I try, the universe steps in to save me. Even these untouchables can't escape my curse. If their death is the only way to save me, so be it. The last attempt was awful. I've got headaches from that brain chip they implanted to keep my mind going. Luckily, a bullet hit the chip, like always, and I got rushed to an emergency hospital. They called it a miraculous survival. Yeah, right. Of course, the billionaire responsible will get away with it. And he'll try again. It always happens. So I hacked this account to warn you and anyone else who thinks they can toy with me. Stay away. Don't look for me. If you do, you'll die. But don't feel bad or angry about it. You're the fortunate one. Trust me, you don't want to be immortal. I have nightmares thinking about how I'll survive when everyone else is gone. Can you give me a lift home? It was that innocent question that nearly led me to the brink of death. This wasn't some hitchhiker by the roadside or a stranger at a gas station. It was someone close to my friend's circle, someone I never expected. My best friend always warned me that my kindness would be my downfall. I've forgiven cheating ex-boyfriends, toxic friends, and backstabbing family members. I've given rides, stayed up all night talking someone out of suicide, bought meals for the jobless. Growing up blessed, I decided to pay it forward whenever I could. This incident happened about 4 or 5 years ago on a quiet Friday night. I chose Netflix and snacks over drinks and karaoke, staying in with my parents while my mother visited my grandmother. It was just me, my father, the pets, and a quiet house. I was curled up in bed, having a Guy Ritchie movie marathon while my dad watched Batman on the couch. About 20 minutes into lock, stock, and 2 smoking barrels, I got a Facebook message notification. I opened the message. It was from Alan, someone I knew of but never met. We had mutual friends, so I accepted his friend request weeks earlier. He posted memes and jokes I found funny. I'd never spoken to him before, but we liked each other's posts. I was surprised to receive a message from him, especially around 10 p.m. on a random Friday. Hey. Simple enough, I thought. Hey man, what's up? I replied, keeping it casual, placing my phone on the bed, and continuing my movie. He responded almost immediately. Good. Hey, listen, I'm at a friend's place. Everyone's drunk. Can you give me a ride home? Weird. I didn't know this guy except through mutual friends. Out of the blue, he asked me for a ride. I was a bit annoyed at the idea of leaving the house, especially for someone I barely knew. On the other hand, it was late, cold outside, buses had stopped running, and taxis were expensive. Where are you? 55 Spring Road. I live at 93 Juliet Street. Quick search on Apple Maps showed he wasn't far. He lived a couple of miles north. It wouldn't take long, and he wouldn't have to walk in the cold or get a ride from a drunk driver. Give me a few minutes to get dressed. I'll let you know when I'm there. Awesome, thanks. A weird feeling settled in my stomach, but my anxiety always acted up when meeting someone new. I threw on jeans, a hoodie, and sneakers, grabbed my wallet, phone, and keys, and told my parents before heading out. As I got into my SUV, the strange feeling intensified. My inner voice told me to turn back, ignore Alan's messages, and apologize in the morning, saying I fell asleep. I pushed the thought away and started driving. As I pulled up to the house and parked across the street, I couldn't help but notice the only source of light was coming from a window on the 3rd floor. Even with my windows up, I could hear the unmistakable sound of drunken chatter. I messaged Alan to let him know I'd arrived, and soon a figure appeared in the window, peering down at me. At that moment, I thanked the stars that my windows were as dark as the law allowed, so there was no way that guy could see me gazing back, trying to make out his features. A few minutes passed before Alan finally texted back, saying he was on his way down. But the man at the window hadn't budged an inch. Eventually, the front door creaked open, and there was Alan, unmistakable in the porch light, probably set off by motion sensors, looking exactly like his Facebook pictures. He descended the steps, backpack slung over his shoulder, and headed my way. I was the only vehicle on the street with its headlights on. He opened the door, hopped into the passenger seat, and plopped his backpack between his feet. He greeted me with an oddly enthusiastic hello and went in for a hug. It was strange, but I'm secure enough in my manhood to return a guy's hug. I started to drive, glancing back up at the 3rd floor window to see the man still watching. The fight-or-flight sensation in my gut came back stronger. "Thanks for the ride, man. Really appreciate it." "Yeah, no problem," I replied, forcing a smile. I kept the radio volume low and watched Alan out of the corner of my eye. He'd occasionally look out the window at me and back at the window. His right leg bounced nervously, and he kept scratching his thigh. In hindsight, clear signs of anxiety or nervousness, but at that moment, I had no clue why. "Nice car, by the way. It's a brand new X5, right?" I nodded. "Yeah, it is. Got it a few months ago." Alan whistled. "Wow, must have cost a pretty penny." I didn't respond to the question. Something about his tone and the implication behind it rubbed me the wrong way. People often asked about the cost of the BMW, but there was something about the way he said it that made me feel like he'd drive off in it given the chance. I wanted to ask him why he reached out to me, of all people, for a ride home, but I kept my mouth shut for most of the trip. His presence was making me incredibly uneasy, and I couldn't wait to drop him off and get myself home. "I really appreciate this, man," he said, breaking the silence. "Didn't want to walk home." "No worries. It's all good." "You do this often." He chuckled. "Give rides to strangers, I mean." I shook my head. "Not usually." Alan laughed again. "Probably a good call." "You know, there are some real crazies out here," he said, in a creepy, Joker-like sing-song. It sent shivers down my spine. Without missing a beat, I retorted, "Yeah, you're right. That's why I keep a piece under my seat. You never know." I glanced at him from the corner of my eye, and his expression remained blank. He stared out of the window and didn't speak for the rest of the ride. As we neared his neighborhood, he pointed to an empty spot a few houses down from his. "You can drop me off here, man. It's cool." I complied, parked the SUV, and Alan quickly gathered his backpack, thanked me, and practically sprinted toward his house, vanishing into the driveway. I shifted gears and sped off, feeling an immense sense of relief the moment I left his neighborhood. I doubted he caught on that I was bluffing about the gun under my seat, but something told me my comment had changed his initial plans. A few weeks later, I came home from work, and my parents were watching the news. Alan's mugshot was on Channel 6. He had been arrested for brutally murdering a girl in our town after she'd given him a ride home. The girl, Allison, left her Facebook open on her laptop, and her mother discovered it when she didn't respond to messages or calls. The police went to Alan's house, where they found Allison's gray Toyota with her body in the trunk. Alan was taken into custody immediately, with Allison's blood on his clothes and hands. Inside Allison's car, on the passenger side, was Alan's backpack, containing various drugs and a bloody mashite. I rushed to the bathroom and barely made it to the toilet before throwing up. My entire life flashed before my eyes as I hovered over the bowl. I couldn't bring myself to tell my parents that Alan was the friend I'd given a ride to a few weeks earlier. However, I did send an anonymous tip to the police about the occupants of the third-floor apartment at 55 Spring Road, leading to the arrest of several men and the discovery of controlled substances. I can't say for sure what would have happened if I hadn't bluffed about having a gun under my seat. But I can say that ever since that night, I do carry a firearm, and I've never given a ride to someone I didn't know personally. A lot of folks can probably relate to my situation. Rent's outrageous, and landing a decent-paying gig is like finding a needle in a haystack. I was barely scraping by when my landlord decided he needed more cash. I didn't have the time or money to fight it. So I started the hunt for a new place, trying not to end up on the streets come month end. For a solid 2 weeks, I scoured for anything within my budget. A few options popped up but fell apart at the last minute. The one place I considered was a house shared with 4 other dudes. They tried tidying up when I came to check out the room, but their efforts were futile. The place reeked like something had died beneath the floorboards or behind one of their shoddy wall patches. It seemed my choices boiled down to a rundown frat house or sleeping rough. When I stumbled upon an affordable apartment listing, it felt like a miracle. Except for the strict no pets policy in the lease, it seemed too good to be true. I pounced on the opportunity, applying minutes after spotting the ad. Within an hour, I got a response, securing a viewing as soon as possible. I figured there must be a swarm of people vying for that apartment. At the time, I felt lucky to snag a viewing. When I reached the address, doubts crept in. No way this place could be so cheap. The apartment complex was huge, yet spotless. Front parking and another lot beneath the building. A sturdy stone wall enclosed the area. I stopped at the front gate, half expecting a doorman. I'd gotten the access code texted to me ahead of time. I've never dealt with a gated community before. Should have been my first warning. The second warning should have been how eerily empty the building felt. I'd parked up front in a desolate lot. I had to punch in another code for the front doors to enter the lobby. Again, no soul at the front desk. Made me wonder what a front desk person would do in an apartment building. Felt more like a hotel setup to me. Inside the lobby was immaculate. I saw my reflection on the polished marble floor. A set of stiff white sofas was neatly arranged, waiting for someone to sit on them. A stack of perfectly arranged magazines graced the black coffee table at the center of the seating area. It all looked untouched, like no one had ever laid a finger on it. A slight chill ran down my spine, but I chalked it up to the air conditioning. I was instructed to head straight up to the 10th floor and to the apartment I was interested in. Someone would meet me there. Even the elevators smelled too clean. I wondered if this place was recently built, explaining why it felt deserted. Maybe they hadn't filled all the units yet. Inside the elevators, the walls were lined with mirrors, making the space seem endless. When I pressed the button for the 10th floor, the doors hung open for what felt like an eternity. When they finally closed, the whole thing plummeted hard downward. Then it rocketed up faster than any elevator I'd been in before. A sinking feeling gripped my stomach as it finally came to a halt. If I moved in, I resolved to take the stairs whenever possible. I bolted out when the doors opened, my heart racing from the sudden jerks during the ascent. I needed a moment to catch my breath and survey the scene. The carpet was a plain light gray, matching the walls. A wooden table with fake silver flowers sat just outside the elevators. It all looked more like a hotel than an apartment building. I wondered if it was initially built as a hotel and then converted to long-term rentals after the project finished. It also looked way out of my budget. I hoped I hadn't wasted a precious day off on some rental scam. I found the correct door. I knocked, even though I'd been told to walk right in. A voice invited me inside. I cautiously pushed the door open, prepared for anything. The apartment was pristine and cool, offering way more space than I required. In the living room stood a middle-aged man rearranging flyers for nearby restaurants. I opened my mouth to introduce myself, but he swiftly took my hand in a firm shake, cutting me off. "Mr. Park, pleasure to meet you. I hope the place meets your standards. I'm Norman Freed, the owner." His voice, deep with a hint of British accent, sent shivers down my spine. His bright smile and voice could charm anyone, and that's what unsettled me. Why was he putting in so much effort for this meeting? He could have 100 other people wanting this apartment. I stammered, unsure of what to say. Any questions I had vanished, and I mentally scolded myself. "Let me show you around. The furniture is included in the price if you're interested. I want moving in to be as seamless as possible for my future tenants," he said, guiding us to the other rooms. There were 2 bedrooms, one larger than the other, with an attached bathroom. It was stocked with essentials, which caught me off guard. Most apartments had a dishwasher and fridge, but not one with a bed, fresh towels, and a full living room set. I couldn't hide my suspicion. "I know what you're thinking. It seems too good to be true, right? Feel free to go over the lease as long as you need. No hidden costs. Just this apartment with everything listed in the ad," Norman assured me. "How can you afford to rent out apartments so cheaply? You could charge triple and still have a line of people," I said, unable to move past that point. His smile never wavered. He seemed prepared to explain. "I come from a wealthy family. My parents left me an amount of money I could never spend in my lifetime, even if I tried. I could have anything I wanted, except one thing: a legacy. I built this building as a step toward that," he said, sweeping his arm around the room. "The rent residents pay goes directly into maintaining the building. I make no profit from the apartments. It makes living here affordable, allowing people to focus on improving other aspects of their lives. Imagine what good you could do without worrying about rent payments." He spoke rapidly, excitement in his tone, but I wasn't fully convinced. This felt like the beginning of a cult. I despised the fact that this might be a trap instead of Norman just being a genuinely good guy going through a midlife crisis. "Could I take the lease with me to review?" I asked. Norman promptly handed over the paperwork. The apartment looked appealing, clean, modern, and with a practical layout. I flipped through the pages, finding nothing suspicious. "You don't have to sign today. Take it home, sleep on it. I'll hold the apartment for a week for you to consider your options and get your affairs in order." I found myself scrutinizing the man. My gut screamed not to trust him, yet I had no better alternatives. I thanked him for letting me visit, and he told me to call if I had any questions. Leaving the meeting, I felt uneasy. When I got home, I researched his name for 3 days before confirming that Norman was telling the truth. He genuinely wanted to do some good in the world. No rent increases unless necessary for building maintenance. And even then, the cost would be divided among the tenants, making it hardly noticeable. I signed the lease and planned to move by the end of next week. The agreement allowed for a generous way out if needed. I felt I had nothing to lose. At least, that's what I thought. I never had so much stuff before. Packing was a breeze. Soon I stood in a brand new apartment. It didn't feel like home. I figured it wouldn't for a while. At least I wouldn't have to hustle as much for rent. But the thought of being alone for extra hours terrified me. So I chose to stick with my grueling work schedule a bit longer. The first night in the apartment felt odd in a way I couldn't explain. It was as if I wasn't alone. I kept expecting someone else to turn the corner. I didn't know if it was the new place or if I just missed Abby again. The feeling of expecting to see her hadn't completely faded yet. I didn't sleep much the first night. At some point, just as I began to drift off, I felt someone sitting on the edge of the bed. I quickly switched on the light, only to find nothing. Shaken, I grabbed a snack, hoping it might calm my nerves. I was a zombie at work the next day. Another thing that bothered me was how empty the building felt. I knew it had just opened for tenants, but I rarely saw others around. The laundry room was always deserted when I used it, along with the parking lot. It was almost as if I was the only one living there. That notion proved wrong within the first 2 weeks of my stay. I finally met my neighbor. I had just finished a late shift at work and was eager to crash in bed. I noticed her struggling to insert her key into the lock while balancing bags of groceries. I offered help, and she was grateful I arrived when I did. I wondered why she didn't just put the bags down, although I didn't voice the thought. "Could you put these on the counter for me? I really need to use the bathroom," she said, rushing off before I could respond. I stepped inside, feeling uneasy about the entire encounter. I wasn't aware grocery stores were open that late. She must have a job that kept her late, similar to mine. I waited awkwardly for her to return, feeling like I should at least explain I was her neighbor before leaving. "You're a lifesaver. I don't know why I always need to pee the moment I reach my front door," she said, her long blonde hair swaying as she hurried over. I assisted her in putting items in the fridge, not very skilled in social situations. "I'm Justin. I live next door." I told her my English name. It wasn't a legal name, but I found it easier for most people to remember. "I'm Amanda. I just moved in. Is it just you next door?" she asked. I doubted she was prying, just making conversation. "Are you living alone too? You bought a lot of food for one person," I remarked as I glanced around her place. Apart from some clothes on her couch, her apartment looked identical to mine. There was no indication of a second person, even though she had bags of bulk pasta and rice. "Oh, it's cheaper to buy in bulk. I freeze a lot of meals. I can drop off some dinners for you from time to time, if you like." Her offer caught me off guard. Her bright blue eyes looked up at mine, expecting a positive response. She seemed around my age. I wondered if she was just a kind person or desperate for a boyfriend. "That would be great, especially on weekends when I have more time off," I replied, not wanting to dismiss her kindness. "Awesome. We'll plan it out. I've been really into cooking lately. I'm getting a rice cooker at the end of the week, which will help." Her smile felt a bit odd. Maybe she was just as awkward around people as I was. She thanked me once more and allowed me to retreat to my apartment, but not before insisting I take her number. Well, at least befriending my neighbor was a simple task. Before the weekend arrived, I noticed something unusual with my bank account. There was way too much money in it. By now, my first and last month's rent should have been paid. I double-checked to see if I had forgotten to send it, but the amount had bounced back. I called Norman's number to inform him. It took several attempts to finally get through. When I did, he confessed he had switched banks and forgot to update his details. The new bank was causing him trouble, and he decided to waive my payment due to the stress he caused. I insisted I needed to pay, but no matter what I said, he deflected my offer in the most polite way possible. This should have been a stroke of luck for anyone. Yet I felt even more uneasy. Every time something went my way, I expected something terrible to happen. Maybe I was just being paranoid. As promised, Amanda came over with dinner on Sunday. It was a simple fried rice dish, and I enjoyed it. She picked at her food, more interested in talking. For some reason, she seemed determined to learn everything about me. The conversation rarely veered in her direction. When it did, she didn't reveal much about herself. By the end of the brief dinner, I felt like I knew even less about her than before. No other red flags appeared. She was friendly, smiled frequently, and offered to come over again when I was free. I wasn't ready to commit to weekly hangouts with someone yet. I told her I would think about it, but that wasn't a satisfactory answer. She skillfully convinced me to agree to a time for next weekend. I started to wonder if there was something wrong with me. This girl was just trying to be nice, and I acted as if she had an ulterior motive. Everything about this new apartment creeped me out for no apparent reason. At least, not initially. The first truly eerie experience occurred in the underground parking lot. A storm with a risk of hail was rolling in, so I decided to use the underground spaces for the first time. I arrived just in time before the rain started pouring down, followed by chunks of hail. Most of the spaces on the first level were taken, which struck me as odd because besides Amanda, I had never seen anyone else inside the building. I found a spot a few spaces away from the elevator. Then a rumble of thunder shook the building, and soon after, the lights flickered out. I had stepped out of my car and was heading toward the exit when I found myself in complete darkness. I tried to use my phone's flashlight, but for some inexplicable reason, my phone wouldn't turn on. My breathing became heavy as I waited for the lights to come back on. In the dark, your mind plays tricks on you rapidly. I should have stayed put, but I was desperate to leave. I thought I knew the direction of the first level. I stumbled around in the dark, feeling the stagnant air almost suffocating. Since I wasn't bumping into cars, I assumed I was heading the right way. Only a few minutes passed in the dark, but it felt like hours. The lights flickered back on, revealing just how far I had wandered in the wrong direction. Instead of moving toward the elevator, I had ended up near the ramp leading to the third level. The lights on the next level didn't turn back on. I found myself staring into the darkness, wondering how I had become so disoriented. I was about to turn around when a noise caught my attention. The sound of wings flapping echoed around me. Sometimes birds got trapped down here, seeking shelter from the rain. My phone started working again. I used its flashlight to identify the bird. I worried it might not find its way out, thinking I should call someone to come down and rescue it. My phone's light scanned the third level, revealing nothing moving in the dark. However, I did notice a row of parked cars, each one accumulating dust. Why would so many people park on the third level when the second one was empty? And why did these cars seem abandoned? Without thinking, I walked down the ramp to investigate further. Some cars were missing license plates, and others had slightly deflated tires. I paused at one with a thick layer of dust on the hood and a forgotten bunny plushie on the dashboard. The bird that had caught my attention landed at the top of the ramp. It stared at me with deep black eyes. It resembled a crow, but was much larger than any I had seen before. Suddenly, I felt an urgent need to get out of there. The bird flapped its wings and took off into the darkness. A chill ran down my spine as I made my way back to the elevator. There were numerous cars left unattended for some reason. No matter how much I pondered it, I couldn't comprehend why. Amanda was waiting outside my door when I got off the elevator. I wasn't in the mood for conversation. "Oh, what's the matter?" "Did the storm scare you?" she asked, noticing my expression. "Yeah, I was in the underground parking when the lights went out. Have you been down there?" Did you see all the abandoned cars? I asked, needing to voice my concern. She simply shrugged, completely unfazed. A lot of stores are just a walk away from here. Plus, most folks order stuff online now or work from home. Probably why they just let the packages sit down there. Saves them on gas, she suggested. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, I replied, although I wasn't entirely convinced by her explanation. It's kinda weird how the power went out down there. I didn't see the lights flicker or anything. I was actually coming over to see if you wanted to have a scary movie night because of the storm. You know, Netflix and chill and all that. I was taken aback by her suggestion. We barely knew each other, and she was dropping hints like that. Had dating really become this straightforward? You do know what Netflix and chill means, right? I stammered, my face turning crimson. I'm well aware it can mean something else if you want it to. So how about chilling at my place for a bit? Her voice took on a suggestive tone that made me step back. I noticed her gray sweatpants and baggy shirt hanging off one shoulder. She was cute, undeniably cute. But the idea of accepting her offer made my stomach churn. It just wasn't the right time for me. I looked away, unsure of how to decline. I have to wake up early for work tomorrow, I said, hoping she'd get the hint. Bold of you to assume you keep us up all night, she chuckled. Her response made me cringe with embarrassment. I stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but she dismissed it with a wave of her hand. It's fine. I just wanted to offer. Am I not your type or something? Something like that, I managed to say, relieved she gave me an out. Are we still cool, though? As neighbors, I mean. I needed a few days to recover from this, but we could still be friends. I figured a lot of folks might be upset with me for turning down someone as willing as her. But I just couldn't handle dating someone right then. Thunder rumbled outside, shaking the building. Amanda suggested we watch some horror movies before the storm passed. With a quick goodbye, she left for her apartment. I hoped she wouldn't bring up this conversation again. Oddly enough, I slept better than I had in a long time, the storm outside providing a soothing white noise. I hadn't realized how silent my bedroom was until I woke up the next morning. The eerie quiet settled over me. I turned on the shower as I did my morning chores just to chase away that unnatural silence. Nearly a full month passed before something happened that I couldn't ignore. I could have dismissed everything as new apartment jitters, but then the package showed up at my door. We had mailboxes in the lobby, so maybe my neighbor received it by mistake and brought it up to me? I hadn't ordered anything, yet the label had my name and address. I hesitated before flipping it around, clueless about what could be inside. I had just finished work, so I changed into fresh clothes before tearing open the mysterious package. 2 plastic items spilled onto the kitchen counter. The sight of them made my stomach plummet. For a split second, I thought I might throw up, but then anger surged within me. Someone had sent me a pair of reflective clip-on bicycle lights, but who could be so cruel? Abby's family didn't even know my full address, and the driver wouldn't have any reason to send them here. Was this some kind of threat, or was it merely someone's sick idea of a prank? I tossed the clips and their packaging into the trash, my blood boiling. I then stormed to the elevator, carrying the tied-up bag to dispose of it downstairs. I couldn't stand having those clips anywhere near my apartment. My fingers jabbed the basement button. It had been a while since I had felt such intense rage. The elevator started to descend, and I watched each floor's lights pass by. When it reached the lobby, I moved closer to the door, expecting there was nothing below the basement. The underground parking might extend further, but these elevators usually opened to the lobby. The panel didn't indicate what floor I was going to. It just kept going. suddenly feeling as if I were falling for ages. Finally, the elevator jolted to a stop. The doors remained closed long enough for me to regain my balance. On shaky legs, I stood up, my fear mounting. The doors began to open, and I pressed my back against the large mirror. Beyond the doors, there was only darkness. My heart raced as I debated whether I should go closer and hit a button to return to the upper floors. Any thoughts vanished when a hand emerged from the darkness into the elevator's light, followed by another. Each arm was impossibly long, and the skin was a deep, dark red. I pressed hard against the mirror, unable to move. A scream lodged in my throat as the hand shot out, gripping my as if I weighed nothing. I saw nothing but heard screaming. It took me a long while to realize that the voice I heard was my own. I half crawled away, still convinced I was somewhere other than the building. "Mr. Park, you all right? Any medical stuff I should know?" The fear was still thick in the air when Norman spoke. My landlord looked genuinely worried. It took me a while to gather my thoughts. "What?" I managed, my voice rough from all the screaming. "I just walked in and found you here, collapsed," he said. I shook my head, still in shock, a bruise forming. I might not have taken the elevator to hell, but something had been pulling double shifts. "How about I take you back upstairs so you can rest?" my overly concerned landlord suggested. I was about to refuse when Amanda stepped out of the elevator. She paused, seeing me on the ground. I asked her if she could help me get back upstairs in case I collapsed again. Without hesitation, she assisted me. Norman told me to reach out if I ever needed anything. I agreed, just so he'd let me go. I didn't tell my neighbor the whole story, just that I could barely register her words as I walked back into my apartment. The sensation of someone standing right behind me persisted. My hands started to shake, and my rational mind screamed at me to leave. I decided to heed that inner voice. I started packing an overnight bag, desperate to get away from that place. I'd also wanted to call my parents, despite the time difference. My finger hovered over the screen to call them. Suddenly, bile surged up my throat. I dropped my phone, doubling over. Black liquid spilled out, leaving a bitter, burning taste. Tears blurred my vision until I cleared my eyes. The moment I finished retching, I moved towards the door. My trembling hands gripped the handle, but my body didn't budge. I willed myself to leave, but my arms refused to comply. I wanted to escape, but my own body seemed to betray me. "I hope you stay here forever," Amanda's voice echoed. I turned only to find my apartment empty. "You'll never have to leave," Norman's voice added, emanating from the empty living room. I shook my head, feeling like my ringtone blared, jolting me awake. I didn't remember going to bed. The black bile was gone, and I was in different clothes than the day before. I answered my phone, my voice shaking, telling my boss I wasn't feeling well, but would try to make it for part of the shift. I expected my body to resist leaving the apartment. I'd never been so grateful to leave for work. Outside, I almost felt normal. The sensation of being watched lingered, but I managed to ignore it. Towards the end of my shift, I started to believe I was fine. Maybe the previous day had been a brief medical episode, like low iron or something. A coworker asked if I was okay, and something was terribly wrong. "I'm fine. Just overworked, overslept," I said, my words feeling wrong. I stood frozen, my expression not reflecting my inner turmoil. Those weren't the words I intended to say. My words got twisted before reaching my mouth. I tried again, attempting to express my dread about my new apartment. Instead, I found myself asking about the morning shift. This wasn't right. I couldn't say what I wanted. As an experiment, I typed a note on my phone, describing my memory lapse from the night before. My hands typed the words without any issue. I needed to get to the bottom of this, but I didn't know where to start. I dreaded returning home. Was it even a home anymore? Desperate to stay away, I took some overtime. Once again, my body acted on its own when it was time to return to my apartment. I mentally screamed, willing it to stop, but it didn't make a difference. The fear intensified as I walked through the lobby doors. Norman saw me. Against my will, I stopped to talk to him. "How are you feeling?" "All better," he asked, his tone overly cheerful. "Yeah, I lied." "Good. Very good. Amanda mentioned you two were getting along, but not as well as we'd hoped. I've asked her to introduce you to her friend who just moved in. She might be more your type." His words sent a chill down my spine. I felt nauseous again. I knew something was horribly wrong, and he just confirmed it. "Why?" I forced out, finally sounding as terrified as I felt. Norman's smile twisted. He looked like a child pulling legs off a spider. He reached for my hand, and I was compelled to take his. "I created this place to make everyone living here as happy as possible. You seem to be overworking yourself, trying to avoid being alone. It looks like you need a new girlfriend after. Well, what happened before you moved here? Don't worry. Leave everything to me. I'll make everything better for you." He got close, his deep voice rumbling with the last words. I wanted to run, to scream. I needed to call someone for help, do anything but what I did in that moment. "Thank you. I appreciate you taking me in. I'll do whatever I can for you," I spoke in a monotone voice that felt alien. No matter how hard I struggled, my hands stayed in his. With another terrible grin, Norman finally released me. I broke free and ran out of the lobby. Instead of sprinting, I half-jogged to the elevator. No matter how much I wanted to leave, I wasn't in control. I've been thinking about what to do. I haven't been able to contact anyone and tell them what's happening. Being able to write all this down has been a miracle. As much as I hate the idea, I need to get to the bottom of this. I won't ever escape if I don't figure out how Norman can control me or what happened in the darkness at the bottom of the elevator. I need answers, even if they kill me. I ain't got no answers, none at all. Except for work and groceries, I can't escape this place. Tried to trick whatever's pulling my strings. Pretended like I wanted to check out the new natural food shop by the airport. Had tickets for the first flight back to my folks' country. Jerked the wheel at the last second, but my hands turned it the other way. Instead of the airport, I smashed my car against a steel roadside barrier. Miracle I ain't dead. Amanda picked me up from the hospital to drive me back to my apartment after they released me. Wanted to beg the doctors to let me stay one more day. Words just wouldn't come. Sat in her car, listening to her chatter away the whole way. Everything she said felt forced. Felt like we were all playing roles in some messed up play. Wondered if she was doing all this against her will, too. Before the accident, she introduced me to her friend, Jasmine, who lived one floor above us. Jasmine was the opposite of Amanda in almost every way. Shy. Dark hair, dark eyes. Lately, Amanda kept inviting her over more often. It was clear they both wanted me to start dating one of them. Thankful it was just a suggestion, something I could still say no to. I still had a bit of choice left in my actions. Took some time off work, which was brutal. Hated staying in the apartment. Felt like unseen eyes were watching my every move. Only moments of peace I got were at work, mostly at the bookstore where I snagged some part-time shifts. Days started to blur together. Couldn't tell anyone what I was going through. Nightmares of that impossible dark basement haunted my nights. terrible flashes of being in a room with twisted bodies, tearing at him, enjoying the gruesome task. Every morning I woke up sick to my stomach. Some days I'd find dried blood under my nails, convincing me these weren't just dreams. Only way I knew what day it was came from my bookstore shifts. This regular customer started coming in on Tuesdays and Sundays. Store was always quiet. The area's gone downhill, more homeless folks than shoppers. When I heard him coming in for the first time, expected to see someone just trying to escape the rain for a while. Instead, I saw someone who made me forget my troubles for a moment. A green wallet sticking out of his back pocket with cute frogs on it. Wasted no time going to a shelf, examining books like they were precious gems, not just regular old mystery novels. His light hair sort of matched the faded pages. Figured he'd have bright eyes, but his were so dark they almost looked black. Couldn't figure out why I stared at him so long. Something about him felt different from any other customer I'd seen. If he noticed my stares, he didn't say nothing, just kept browsing. Not a word between us the whole time he was there. Told him the total when he was ready to pay. Pulled out that frog wallet to give exact change. Who even carries cash anymore? Bagged up his books and for some reason called out to him before he left. Better hide your wallet better. Not the best kind of people round here, I told him. Hated how weary I sounded. He stopped, feeling for his wallet. It was sticking out 'cause it was so long. Lifted his baggy sweater to hide the frog print from sight. Thanks, he said, his voice so soft I could barely hear him as he left the store. Couldn't explain why that simple chat meant so much. Maybe 'cause it was just so damn normal. Couldn't talk to Amanda or Jasmine without thinking they were hidden something from me. Wanted to shout at my coworkers about what was going on at my apartment, but the words came out all wrong. Been so long since I'd gotten to say what I really wanted to. Thought if I had just one normal piece of my life, I might get through whatever was happening. Think you're working too much. Maybe you should take some time off. Norman's words cut through me. How long had I been stuck in this building? 2 months? 3? Guess I should at least keep my part-time job. Still gotta pay rent, I said, my voice shaking. He gave it some thought. That same bright smile I hated showed up when he nodded. Both of us knew rent was a lie. Not a single payment had come out of my account since I moved in. We kept pretending like everything was normal. Started sleeping more after I gave up one of my jobs. Had nothing else to do besides pace my apartment and sleep. Sometimes blessed with dreamless nights. But when I did dream, they were vivid. The one that scared me the most, I'd never forget. Felt my bare feet against the cold marble floor as I stepped into the elevator. Long free fall toward the dark basement made my stomach lurch. Legs carried me into that darkness that felt like it went on forever. Heard noises that almost sounded human. Walked further, floor getting wet. Overwhelming sharp iron smell choked the air. Caught a hint of candlelight at the end of the pitch-black room. Wanted to turn back, but my legs kept moving. Would rather die than see what was there. Stopped at the edge of a wooden stage. Deep red curtains hid the back wall. 2 people stood waiting for everyone to arrive. Figures beside me, barely in the light, weren't human anymore. Bodies twisted into ghoulish shapes, making my skin crawl. First person on the stage spoke in a garbled tone. Foreign was nothing but hazy static. Knew the second person on the stage, though. Every part of me screamed at her to run. Amanda stood so close, and if I had control over myself, I knew I could have saved her. But she stood there, a wide, crazed smile on her face, as the other figure handed her a long, curved dagger. She raised the blade toward herself, that expression of pure joy never leaving her face. Before I saw that blade, I woke up screamin'. Sweatin' all over, I ran to the bathroom, trying to purge whatever was in my stomach. Couldn't stop shackin'. Wished it was just a nightmare. But lookin' down at my grimy bare feet, I knew it wasn't. All I could think about was checkin' on Amanda. I sprinted next door, poundin' on the wood. To my shock, the door swung open. I cautiously stepped inside, found nothin'. No personal stuff, no food in the fridge, no sign she ever lived there. Didn't even know her last name. Tried to call the police to report someone missin', but sickness hit me before I could dial the last number. With nothing else to do, I took a shower, got dressed, and waited quietly in my room for Tuesday. Needed a normal chat with someone not tied to this damn building. But this awful place wouldn't let me be. A knock came to my door. Refused to answer until I heard a woman's voice on the other side. Heard you ain't feeling well. Brought some food. Against my gut feelin', I let Jasmine in, hopin' she might tell me what happened to Amanda. She got right to work, warmin' up soup on the stove. Look like hell, she half-joked. What day is it? I rasped. Monday. Seriously gotta take better care of yourself. Seen Amanda? I asked straight up, too tired to dance round the subject. Don't know Amanda. Hey, how about I crash here for a day or so? Just help you get back on your feet, she offered, her soft voice staying cheery. Please, I just need some answers, I begged. I was at the end of my rope, would 'a gotten on my knees if she'd just tell me why I couldn't leave this damn place, or what the hell was happening in the basement. She stopped cooking, turned off the stove, and before I knew it, she had my hand, brushing back my hair. Poor thing. If you just accept this, it ain't so bad. You can do whatever you want with whoever you want. Just embrace what your body's asking for. I jerked away from her, a chill shooting through me. The kind, soft Jasmine I met shifted on a dime. You gotta go, I said, keeping my voice steady. Your girl ain't here no more. Why hang on to feelings for her? Move on. Bury her already. I saw red before she even finished speaking. Did something I never thought I could. I slapped her. Hard. She staggered, almost toppling over. The fact I felt some sort of relief from that act made me want to run away from myself. Instead of crying or getting upset, she laughed. You like that? Keep going. I don't mind. Using more force than I wanted, I grabbed her wrist, dragging her out of my apartment. I know I hurt her again. She didn't fight back, just laughed the whole time. I slammed the door in her face, my breathing refusing to steady. Call me. I'll come by anytime. Gritted my teeth, holding back a reply. Hated this. Everything. Hated what I was becoming. Hated this apartment and hated not having answers. At least I learned it all went down on a Monday. Just one more day, and I could get to the bookstore for a taste of normal life. It was raining on that Tuesday. Brought an extra umbrella just in case. The regular who handled books so careful-like came in right on time. His hair and shoulders were wet, showing he got caught in the rain. Ain't said much to him sides hello or complimentin' his wallet, and that was all I needed. Thought about how weirded out he might feel if he knew just how much I looked forward to saying one or two words to him. Watched him picking out used books so gentle. Still didn't know what he was looking for in 'em. His choices were all over the place, made me wonder if he was getting in for something other than readin'. Strangely, never felt the urge to ask him anything about himself. He paid with exact change again. Before he walked away, I stepped out from behind the counter with the spare umbrella. I got two if you need one, I offered. He looked surprised at the offer, quietly thanked me. Our fingers touched, and the strangest thing happened. The brief contact hurt. Pulled back, my hand feeling like it was on fire. My face turned a deep shade of red over that odd reaction. I just got a cramp. I lied. He ain't buying it. Pulled out the receipt, scribbled something on the back. If you need help with anything, call me, was the most I'd heard him speak. Had some sort accent I couldn't place. Carefully took the paper he offered, looked over what he wrote down. Sarin, followed by a long phone number. I was gonna turn down his offer. Needed some regular in my life, and ringing up a usual customer for help. That ain't the norm. Anything. I'll pick up, I promise, he said, his voice firm. I nodded, feeling this weird flutter in my gut. Somebody had my back, somebody beyond that godforsaken apartment building. That's exactly why I couldn't dial him up, though. Thanks, I said, meaning those words. Just knowing somebody offered help felt like enough. He split, expecting a call from me eventually. Deep inside, I hoped we'd only cross paths in the bookstore. I guess Norman sensed my cheer that day. Ran into him in the lobby. He pulled me up short, his face breaking for half a sec. You still look like hell. How about ditching that part-time gig? Stress ain't your friend. I got some other gigs you'd kill at. I'll fill you in tomorrow. His lousy act couldn't hide how sinister this guy was anymore. He knew I found solace in the bookstore, and now he yanked that away. Got a taste of freedom, then he snatched it back. I despised him right then. Enough to end me. He sneered, eyes squinted, voice deep and mocking. I wanted to. Nobody else was in that lobby. My hands itched to wrap round his throat. For once, what he wanted and what I craved lined up. I held back, knowing I'd be playing right into his hands. Get up to your place and wait for tonight. We got some real good times ahead, he said, his tone heavy with anticipation. My feet carried me, my body moving wooden-like to the elevator. Only when I stepped into my pad did the spell break. I screamed, all that fear and frustration bursting out. Wanted to yell for help. Wanted to spill the beans to someone about what was going on. But every time I tried, everything inside me rebelled. Now I had nothing. Not even myself. Seemed like my only option was to sit tight and wait for whatever twisted game Norman had in store. I pulled a receipt from my pocket, eyeing the handwriting of the one person who seemed to give a damn about me. Dialing him up was out of the question. Thoughts of Amanda flooded my mind, of how I couldn't save her. I hadn't witnessed that dagger piercing her chest, but I knew she was gone. Calling wasn't just about saving myself. Jasmine's fate might mirror her friend's soon enough. I dialed the numbers, the same sick feeling gripping my stomach. Black bile spewed from my mouth, and my thumb froze. The promise that Sarin would answer gave me enough strength to press through the vile sensations and hit that final number. His voice came through, but I couldn't make out what he said. Pressure in my head slammed me to the ground. I coughed and sputtered, my entire body racked with pain. Somehow, I managed to say the hardest words of my life. Please, help. I choked out. I'll be there in 10 minutes, Sarin replied before the phone died. I remained on the ground, writhing in agony. I dreaded the fact he answered. I prayed I'd just die so nothing happened to him. I wasn't that lucky. Knock, knock, Mr. Park. Norman's voice pierced the air. I fought to sit up, watching him open the door. The urge to punch him in the face surged through me, propelling me toward him. My fist clenched. None of that. "At least, not right now," he commanded. I hissed in frustration as my arm fell limply to my side. I fought against his control, my muscles aching. He noticed my phone and the receipt on the floor, picked up both items, and handed the receipt to Jasmine, who had just entered the room. "Mr. Park, go to the lobby and wait for the person you called. Then kill them," Norman said, sending sheer horror through me. Jasmine pulled out a lighter, setting the scrap of paper ablaze, leaving no trace. Norman kept my phone, and I knew I'd never see it again. An expression twisted my face. One I couldn't control. I was smiling, but it wasn't me. No matter how much I struggled or screamed internally, I couldn't change a thing. I was trapped in my own body, helpless to stop what was coming. Outside, I appeared calm. Inside, I wanted to run and scream. 10 minutes felt like an eternity. Finally, Saren arrived at the lobby doors, a worried look on his normally calm face. Instead of the baggy sweater he wore at the bookstore, he was dressed in a suit and tie. "Are you all right? What happened?" he pressed as he followed me through the lobby. "It's easier to explain upstairs," the other force controlling my body said. He nodded, not suspecting anything. We entered the elevator. I'd never wanted someone I cared about to die. People might have said I wasn't to blame for Abby, but this time there was no way around it. I was going to kill a person. The doors closed, and we rode in silence for the first 2 floors. "You're not acting like yourself," his soft voice came from behind me. I watched in horror as my hands flew to his neck. With a strength I didn't know I possessed, I lifted him off the ground. His legs kicked, trying to escape my grasp. I pressed so hard the mirror behind him cracked. I saw my reflection and didn't recognize the person staring back. Eyes wide and crazed, a grin so wide it took up my entire face. This was a true nightmare. I felt his warm skin twist under my fingers. I wanted to break his neck to make it quick, but he gasped for air as his hands pulled, hurting another person. I could never forgive myself for calling him. When all hope was lost, Saren did something I didn't understand. He shoved a small black paper-like object near my mouth. It confused the thing that took over my body long enough for me to act. Somehow, I knew I needed to accept this from him. I ate what he offered, and the effects hit me instantly. My hands let go of him to claw at my neck. My vision swam. Whatever had control was pushed aside for a moment. It fought back hard to regain power. It took everything I had to push it away again. I fell to my knees, the inside of my chest feeling like 100 wasps were stinging my lungs. No matter how much it hurt, I refused to give up. If it took over again, Saren would die. I coughed up black liquid for what seemed like hours. The pain flared up as the other force thrashed. I pulled and pushed until finally the war inside settled down. I still felt something there, but it wasn't the dark, heavy force as before. For the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like something was watching me. I hadn't fully recovered, but I had to check if Saren was okay. At some point, the elevator halted. I crawled over his slumped body, tears threatening to spill over. He weakly raised his head, throat bruised from the attack. "You okay?" he rasped. I shook my head. I couldn't fathom how he could ask someone who just attacked him such a question. I didn't mean to. I stammered, unable to find the words. The opening doors diverted my attention to the other side of the elevator. Jasmine stood there with 2 unfamiliar men. Confusion flickered across their faces before they advanced, aiming to finish what I started. She brandished a knife, poised directly at Saren's face. For once, I was in control, at least mostly. I shoved her back with surprising strength. She slumped against the control panel. The other two men approached with weapons. They seemed to move in slow motion. Disarming them was a simple task. One was knocked out cold, but the other bolted for the stairs. I let him go, knowing I wouldn't catch up. Carefully, I lifted Jasmine, half dragging her out of the elevator. "It seems like you've been possessed," Saren said, startling me. He looked fully recovered from the attack. The bruises on his neck had nearly faded. "Possessed? Like by a ghost or a demon?" I asked, my words coming out slowly. He shook his head slightly, appearing lost in thought about how to respond. "No, more like tainted magic." "Wait, what?" "Hold on," I said, raising my hands, attempting to grasp the unexpected revelation. "That's a natural reaction. Perhaps I should have introduced myself properly. I'm Agent Saren Rin. I work for a company that deals with supernatural threats," he explained, although it didn't do much to clear my confusion. "Is that why you kept coming to the bookstore?" "Did you somehow know I was involved in all of this?" I queried. "No. I just love books. However, I did sense there was something different about you. I wasn't sure if it was because you were a half-breed or a human affected by magic in some way." At least that was a straightforward answer, though it left me with even more questions. "So, your company didn't send you to handle what's happening in this building?" I inquired. He shook his head in response. "I've left a message with them. We're short on manpower. If they're aware of this building, they haven't deemed it enough of an emergency to act upon. If I don't return in 3 hours, they'll send backup." I glanced over at the 2 people I had incapacitated. I wasn't sure how many people we'd need to face or what kind of powers Norman possessed. Waiting for 3 hours seemed like a risky plan. "Then why are you here alone?" I questioned, curious why an agent was operating solo. "Because you asked for help," Saren said, his tone warm. His words nearly brought tears to my eyes. I had endangered both of us because I couldn't keep my problems to myself. "I'm so sorry. I never should have," I began, but he interrupted me. "Can I use your full name?" he asked. I nodded, and he continued. "Yi-chun, none of this is your fault. You shouldn't apologize for the actions of others." It felt strange to hear my name after so long. I nodded, trying to hold back the tears that refused to be held back. I took a moment to rub my eyes clear. Saren had offered help, and I had accepted. That was all. After blaming myself for so long, it was unfamiliar to hear someone say I wasn't to blame. "How did you know my name?" I asked, realizing I hadn't given him that information. "Caller ID," he replied simply. The straightforward response made me chuckle for the first time in months. Now that it was clarified, we needed a strategy to get out of this place. "What did you do to me? I mean, how come I'm not under Norman's control anymore?" I asked, attempting to grasp his abilities. Saren looked away, a hint of guilt in his expression. "I owe you an apology. I took a gamble. I can cleanse darkness, to some extent. My power endangered your life. If you weren't strong enough to grasp the magic left behind, you would have perished. I doubt the same fate awaits the others. They embraced the darkness and the power it brings. If I purify them, it'll erase their entire essence." I glanced at Jasmine, contemplating if that was true. She seemed to relish her newfound power. And if Amanda's fate was real, she willingly surrendered her life. Even if others were like me, there would be no way to discern it. Saren only used his power because he knew my life was hanging by a thread. If we were certain someone wouldn't die from being purified, should we attempt it? "We'll need more allies to escape," I suggested. It might benefit us, but harm them. Instead of targeting us, they'll turn against each other. I might not be strong enough to shield both of us. Adding another person would complicate things, Saren replied. I wanted to apologize again for dragging him into this. Leaving anyone behind felt like betrayal. Saren was right, though. We needed to prioritize ourselves. He had summoned backup, but they wouldn't arrive in time to assist us. They could at least clean up the mess we left in our wake. Should we use the stairs to reach the lobby then? I want to try and get out of here, I suggested, though deep down I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Saren shook his head and motioned toward the elevator. I can sense things you're unaware of. The stairs have been magically sealed. Currently, our only clear route is the way we came in. I would have preferred to kick down the stairwell door until my foot broke. Elevators were easily manipulated by external forces. My skin crawled at the hazy memories of the basement. It'll be fine. I'm here to help you, no matter what happens, Saren said, his confidence unshaken. I still don't understand why you showed up. We barely know each other, I admitted. You asked for help. It's the same simple reason I gave you before. The motivation remains unchanged. We were about to face something even more perilous. I had called him here, and that fact wouldn't change. But having assistance also wouldn't change. Confronting whatever horrors awaited us was far better than doing it alone. With no other option, we returned to the elevator. I noticed how anxious Saren appeared when the doors closed behind us. It was the first time he seemed even slightly rattled. Are you okay? I asked, fearing what lay ahead if he looked this frightened. I despise elevators, he admitted. His human reaction eased my tension slightly. We descended slowly, each floor passing until we reached the lobby, but the descent didn't stop there. I knew where we were headed and wanted more time to brace myself. Saren took off his suit jacket and handed it to me. This should offer some protection against minor attacks. It felt like an ordinary jacket, no signs of modifications to make it more resilient. I put it on, finding it a bit snug. After wearing the jacket, I noticed he suddenly held a weapon. A gun would have been more reassuring, but he gripped a long black wooden staff instead. The tainted magic that possessed you might resurface if you're carrying any emotional burdens, he explained, not looking in my direction. I bit the inside of my cheek. We continued descending, the sensation of falling making my stomach churn. If it was anyone else, I wouldn't have spoken about what had torn my life apart. My girlfriend, Abby, she died in an accident. Everyone keeps calling it that. An accident. It was dark. The driver said he didn't see her. Even the paramedics said she should have lived if she hadn't landed wrong. No one wants to pin blame on anyone, but you can blame someone. I suggested she start riding to work so we could save money. I wanted to get a house and have a real life together. I'm the one who didn't give her lights for her bike because I wanted to save them as a birthday present. I put money and a small surprise over her safety. I spoke calmly, half expecting to break down mid-sentence. But I had cried so much over her death that I simply didn't have enough tears left. Saren listened in silence. I stole a glance at his expression. It told me everything I needed to know. He was an agent, right? How many people he knew had died because of his work? He fought against the supernatural. Surviving wasn't guaranteed. Do you ever stop blaming yourself? I asked him. No, you just keep living because you still love them, even if they're gone. Oddly, that comforted me enough to think I could handle whatever might happen. That was until the elevator suddenly dropped. Our feet left the ground, and I fell over when it finally stopped. Saren recovered quickly, positioning himself in front. he was prepared for whatever waited just outside the doors. A ding resonated as the doors slowly opened to darkness. I regretted not having a weapon. My breath caught in my throat when hand, caked in dried blood with long claws, reached into the light. Before the creature fully emerged, Saren sprang into action. He forced the creature back with the tip of his black staff. I shouted after him. I staggered to my feet, ready to charge into the darkness and assist him. I fumbled blindly for a moment until lights flickered to life around us. Small floating orbs flared up, providing enough illumination. I saw those twisted creatures, their stark shadows making their features even more terrifying. They had once been human, and I might have turned into one of them if Saren hadn't intervened. Their mouths were far too large, and their eyes were nothing but pits of black. Each limb stretched to unnatural lengths. One advanced toward me, and I grabbed its thin wrists to toss it aside. The newfound strength, a result of Saren's purification, made easy work of throwing it far off into the distance. Whatever purification he had performed removed the tainted part of the magic, but left behind its power. I knew it wouldn't last forever. I needed to move and act wisely. Saren fought on his own. He moved as if he'd done this 1,000 times before. It was as if he could sense the creature's movements even before they made a move. I could only watch him for a few seconds. I needed to focus on saving myself. A set of claws landed on my arm, but the suit jacket protected me from damage. I didn't know any martial arts or how to fight properly. Turns out I didn't need to. One well-placed punch to the face was all it took. We were both out of breath by the time we cleared the area in front of the elevator. Saren gave me a moment to recover. I didn't want to keep moving, but we didn't have a choice. Shouldn't we fully take care of these things? I asked, sweat stinging my eyes. No. There is a slim possibility the tainted magic can be removed from them. However, that will not be the case moving forward. He gripped the black staff in his hand, and the pole transformed into a long blade. He could no longer afford to leave these creatures alive. We ventured deeper into the darkness, the floating balls of light guiding our way. I wondered if Saren had conjured them, but I didn't bring it up. It felt almost invasive to ask if he was human or not. The floor became sticky as we walked. Flashbacks to those horrible nightmares flooded back. I knew what we would find, and I dreaded it. No human should ever be in this place. We halted a few feet away from the grand stage from my nightmares. Dim red lights hovered above. A man I despised stood there, a wide smile on his face, awaiting us. Now, what do you have here? You somehow broke free? How interesting. Norman didn't sound upset that I was no longer possessed. He was almost excited about it. As expected, more of those monsters emerged from the dark. I forced down a scream of terror when I saw them. Exposed rib cages, fused bodies, and beings missing heads stumbled closer. These things could no longer be saved. The best thing for them was to put them out of their misery. Punching them in the face didn't seem like an option. I wasn't sure how I could help in this fight. The first creature leaped into the air, claws out. I caught it and tossed it aside, unsure what else I could do. Saren had already sliced 2 in half by the time I grabbed hold of a second one. I slammed the thing onto the ground until it didn't move. The smell of blood turned my stomach. I might be stronger than before, but I wasn't cut out for this sort of fighting. Even with Saren's skills, we couldn't win. A group of those monsters knew I was the weakest link. They piled on me, completely overwhelming any attempts I made to escape. Each took an arm and painfully forced them behind my back. I cried out as I was forced to my knees, convinced I was about to die. "Agent, come up here and join me." Norman called out in a gleeful tone. I silently pleaded with Saren not to heed him, but against my wishes, he began to move toward the stage. The creatures allowed him to pass by them, and Norman gestured for Saren to drop his weapon. The sound of the black blade hitting the ground tore at my heart. As Saren ascended the stage, 2 creatures grabbed his arms and dragged him over beside Norman. He remained calm in front of this monster that had tormented so many people. Not a flicker of fear crossed his face when Norman wiped some blood off Saren's face with the back of his hand. I'm shocked Mr. Park knew an agent. What a nice surprise. Norman started, his tone dripping with false cheerfulness. Cut the crap, I shouted, momentarily wiping the smile off Norman's face. What the hell is all of this? He contemplated my question, then turned to face me with a playful expression. I rarely get to do a villain speech. I think it'll be fun. His attempt to play this off as a joke disgusted me. At least I would get some answers. As you may be aware, I am placing tainted magic inside humans. It brings out their suppressed traits, allowing them to act on any impulse that comes to mind. No morals, no regrets, just sheer bliss from their actions. If you had accepted my gift, you would have greatly enjoyed your days with us, he explained. I spat in response, showing my contempt, but it didn't bother him. This is an exchange. I give people the chance to feel alive for a time. Eventually, the magic transforms their bodies into what you see around you. When they are too far gone, I put an end to their suffering. You don't care about these people. The tainted magic feeds on their emotions and grows over time. You're just using their bodies and their pain, Saren said sternly. Norman's expression almost faltered from being called out. He quickly recovered and spread his arms wide, mimicking the posture of a pastor at church. I gave these people a safe place to live, joys beyond their dreams. Of course, I'll ask for one simple thing in exchange. With a flourish of his arms, the layers of red curtains behind him fell to the large wooden stage. What they revealed made Saren's face fall. I wasn't certain of what I was looking at, but I knew it had the power to end the world. It's dangerous to be so close to a rip between worlds like this, Saren warned. Indeed, it looked like a tear in reality. The edges flickered with a dark blue light that rippled outward. It must have only been a foot across but 6 feet tall, hovering just above the stage. A low humming emanated from the tear, making my ears ring. My head spun just staring at it. A primal fear gripped my stomach. My body recognized the danger even if my brain didn't fully comprehend it. I came from this tear between worlds, Norman announced, his false kind tone finally giving way to a sinister one. My mother was part of a supernatural research team investigating this opening. A monster made of nothing but chaos and madness slipped through. They managed to banish it back to where it came from, but not before it infected my mother, resulting in yours truly. I've been feeding this place with magic for years, hoping to open the rip large enough for my real father to come forth. I suppressed the shiver that crawled up my spine. The building might have looked new, but who knows how long it had been a trap, feeding people to this portal to the beyond. Norman lured in people whom no one would search for when they went missing, sustaining this twisted ritual for years. I hadn't even told my parents where I had moved. I imagined it was the same for everyone else who arrived here, hoping for a fresh start. If you allow that tear to open any further, what lies on the other side will annihilate this world, Saren stated. He tested his restraints slightly. In response, the monsters holding me in place clamped down hard on my shoulder. The suit jacket prevented their sharp teeth from breaking my skin, but the pressure was excruciating. Seeing this, Saren ceased his minor struggle. I'm aware of that fact. So, thank you for coming here and unwittingly helping me toward my end goal. Norman walked over to Saren, a large half-circle blade in his hands. I yelled at him to stop, ready to beg for the other man's life. If he wanted me to become possessed again, I would comply. I couldn't bear to watch another person die because of me. The blade touched the back of the agent's neck. Saren's face remained calm, as if he was prepared for death. He made eye contact with me and smiled, a comforting expression. I could do nothing but watch as Norman grabbed a handful of Saren's hair and pulled the blade toward him. The steel cut through without any effort. In the blink of an eye, the man who had answered my call for help had his head neatly severed from his body. Dark blood poured down the front of his white button-up shirt. Norman's maniacal laughter echoed through the darkness. The hovering balls of light that had accompanied us vanished, leaving only the red light above the stage. I shook my head, not wanting to believe what I had just witnessed. I felt nauseous, and if I had had anything in my stomach, I would have vomited. The creature held Saren's limp body so he stayed on his feet. Norman pointed the blade he had used to take another life toward the tear in an offering. With this, on one step closer to mine. A deafening tearing sound drowned out his words. The creatures flinched, some retreating into the darkness. The room shook, causing Norman to fall onto the wooden stage. He stared in awe at the tier, which had now opened wide enough for a bus to drive through. Finally, what lay beyond became visible. I nearly lost my sanity just from gazing at it for a few seconds. Massive monsters writhed beyond the rip between worlds, their forms entwining in an alien realm. These creatures defied human comprehension. Their countless eyes fixated on an opening to a planet they could effortlessly conquer. That world was a realm of pure chaos. I should have taken out an agent sooner. Who knew they had this much magic? Norman exclaimed, beyond ecstatic, having achieved his lifelong goal. When I tore my gaze away, I noticed something else that defied possibility. Saren's body didn't collapse when the other creatures scattered. Even when Norman didn't turn to see the black liquid oozing from Saren's neck wound, or Saren's head transforming into the same black ooze. Hope flickered for a fleeting moment, only to be crushed as I witnessed what my new friend was becoming. Oblivious to the dangers around him, Norman stood, welcoming an ever-shifting tendril emerging from the tear. His voice was abruptly silenced. The tendril struck too swiftly for human eyes to follow. Slowly, both halves of the man peeled away from each other. He didn't even have the time to realize he was dead. His mouth moved for a split second, as if attempting to finish his last few words. He deserved such a fate. I turned away, unable to stomach such a gruesome sight. Another tendril descended inches away from my side, snatching up a creature and attempting to drag it back into the other world. I needed to flee, yet I hesitated to leave Saren behind, hoping against hope that he might still be alive. I glanced back at the stage and witnessed the final stages of his transformation. The black blood swirled, forming a massive creature standing on 4 legs. It was a bizarre amalgamation of various animals, the components a confusing jumble to my mind. The body resembled a cat, but the legs belonged to a horse. Great folded black wings were tucked tight on his side, and a long lion tail trailed behind. Instead of a human head, a pitch-black torso was attached, resembling an odd centaur. A jackal's pointed head replaced a human one, with oversized rabbit ears atop, and a flowing mane of hair covering its eyes. It was a bizarre fusion of numerous features that somehow fit together. A tendril from beyond descended to split the new creature in two, but Saren was faster. He seized it and devoured the intruder within seconds. A deafening sound echoed, almost akin to a scream of pain. Norman's creations became victims. Both Saren and the tendrils attacked them. The tendrils dragged them away, while Saren voraciously devoured them. With each consumption, his body grew a little larger. It was a miracle I hadn't been noticed by either of them. At first, I thought this might be a fortunate turn of events. Then I realized the horrifying truth. Saren wouldn't stop feasting on what lay beyond that portal, growing larger and more uncontrollable. If he continued, the entire world would be at risk. I knew he'd never willingly endanger another person. If he remained in this monstrous form, he'd be as perilous as the monsters he fought. I needed to get him out of there. I sprinted, attempting to pick up the blade Saren had dropped. The metal seared my hand, forcing me to let it go. I had come in without a weapon, climbing onto the now damaged wooden stage and charging toward the chaos. I noticed the easy meal. His sharp teeth tore apart the thing endangering my life, but not to protect me. He was only focused on consuming, nothing more. By the time I'd wriggled free from the leftover tendril's grasp, he had moved closer to the tier. The booming screams persisted as the monsters on the other side attempted to retreat. Other tendrils grabbed the edges of the rift, attempting to pull it shut, to no avail. If Saren entered that portal, I would lose him forever. I ignored my fear and pain, positioning myself in front of him. I wrapped my arms around his front leg, planting my feet against the wood, pleading with him to stop. But my full weight did nothing. He continued moving forward, and I felt the unnatural air of the other world at my back. If I didn't let go, I'd be pulled through the portal to my death. "Let me help you," I implored him, channeling all my strength into keeping him in our world. For a horrifying moment, I thought Saren had somehow perished. His body began to melt in my arms. I refused to panic, searching through the black sludge for any sign he was all right. I felt an arm in the pile and dived in, pulling up the rest of his body. Saren emerged from the now disappearing thick pile, unconscious but alive, a thin scar around his neck. I wasted no time getting him into my arms and struggled to escape. The creatures from the other world hesitated out of fear. I didn't have much time before they attacked again. My arms burned, yet I still carried Saren out of there. His body was limp, and I feared he might truly be dead. His face was too pale for comfort. Knowing the coast was clear, the creatures from beyond forced their way out of the tier. I pushed my body hard, running. I dared not look back to see how close those monsters were. I saw the light of the elevator, my legs shaking from exhaustion, and my lungs burning. I felt the chaos closing in behind me as I jumped into the light. I finally looked, seeing nothing but a wall of those twisting tendrils. The doors closed just in time to keep us safe. Or so I thought. The elevator jerked into motion, a loud thud reverberating beneath us. Those things were attempting to breach in. With their collective effort, they pushed the steel box upward. Fear clawed at me. They might crush us against the top of the shaft. I almost regretted allowing this darkness into the world, all in an attempt to save a friend. Miraculously, the doors opened to the lobby. I yanked Saren out just before the tendrils burst through the floor. To my astonishment, the lobby wasn't deserted. A group of people in suits stood there, almost as if they were expecting this moment. 2 individuals grabbed us, pulling us to safety, while 5 others rushed to the elevator. The tendrils were repelled by an unseen force, the kind those agents wielded. In moments, they sealed the opening with a kind of magic that baffled me. A barrage of questions came my way. I couldn't comprehend any of their inquiries. My vision blurred, and I found myself collapsing to the floor. I woke up, my head heavy, convinced I was still in the lobby. Sitting up, I yelled, searching for threats. My mind finally caught up with my surroundings. I wasn't in my apartment building. I was in some sort of private hospital room, Determined to find out what happened, I got out of bed. When I opened the door, I startled the person who was about to enter, as much as they startled me. I blinked a few times, thinking I was hallucinating. The nurse wore light blue scrubs, but her body seemed to be made of something resembling pink jello. I couldn't resist. I squished her cheeks between my hands. Her skin was cool, the experience oddly pleasant. She seemed to enjoy it until she pulled away and smacked herself in the face. "Lalu, get it together. You're a professional," she scolded herself. I felt a twinge of guilt for invading her space without permission, but she didn't seem to mind. "You're not human," I finally said. "That's correct. You're at a clinic for the supernatural. It seems like you won't have any lasting damage from your encounter, which is very good." After facing horrifying monsters, it was refreshing to meet a cheerful and cute supernatural being. "Is Saren okay? And what happened to the building?" I asked, starting to feel a sense of unease. "He's fine. In fact, he's in the room at the end of the hall. He'll have more information for you about the aftermath," she said, kindly directing me to his room. A weight lifted off my shoulders when I saw him quietly reading a book in the clinic bed. The nurse left us alone to talk. There was a tray of untouched food on his side table. "Do you want my pudding?" he offered when I sat down. I accepted, wondering why he wasn't eating. He told me he had overeaten and wasn't feeling well because of it. Aside from that, he was fine. The corporation sealed the building. It'll take some time to fully close the rip, but it can be done. Tears between worlds happen more often than most people think, so it's not their first time dealing with this sort of thing, Saren said as I ate. Suddenly, I'd lost my appetite, thinking about how many people had died over the years and how close I came to joining them. How did that continue for so long? If there is an entire company to handle this kind of thing, how did Norman carry on the way he did? Was it because he had powers we didn't know about? Saren closed his book to answer my question. "We investigated the area. There was no supernatural research team, and it appears the only one who knew about the rip was Norman. He wasn't a half-breed or had any powers beyond controlling the tainted magic in that building. He was human. The creatures from beyond manipulated him into thinking he was something more significant than he was." My chest tightened at his words. How many times had something like this happened? How many people were driven mad by forces from beyond our world attempting to invade? I still despised Norman for everything he did, regardless of whether he was a victim or not. "The corporation has all your items in storage. They'll provide accommodations for you and the others who were rescued from the building. The others are still receiving treatment, but their prognosis looks hopeful." That was some unexpected good news. If they hadn't offered accommodations, I would have moved back in with my parents. Leaving the country I had spent most of my life in would be difficult, though. "May I make a suggestion?" Saren asked in an unusually soft voice. I nodded, unaware of what might have caused him to act this way. "It would be unwise for you to be alone after what has happened. Would you be comfortable moving into my spare bedroom? I do need some help organizing my books." A smile spread across my face. I hadn't thought I could still do that. He was right. I shouldn't be alone. Being alone got me into this whole mess in the first place. If I were smart, I would have visited my parents after Abby died. Instead, I bottled it up and let myself be exploited. Besides, Saren had asked for my help. I had already decided I would do anything he needed, whether it meant putting my life on the line or just sorting books. Because I knew he would do the same. After I agreed, he asked another question I didn't know I needed. "What was your girlfriend like?" I smiled again. The pain in my chest came, but it didn't overwhelm me. I needed to talk about her after keeping it all to myself for so long, and Saren had nothing but time to listen. I was glad I asked for his help, even though he was a stranger at that point. If I hadn't, I wouldn't still be here. After all the horrors, nightmares, and heartbreak, I was lucky enough to get through it, but only because I wasn't alone. I gave it everything I had to help my kid escape it to me back in the day. You ain't gonna live like this. You're gonna do better than me. You're gonna be somebody. But what does an 18-year-old know about getting anybody out anywhere? I couldn't even get myself out. Me and my girl were in my mom's basement, trying to sort our lives out for Abel's sake, but it was never gonna work. She was younger than me, didn't want to be a mom, and split when he was just a couple of months old. My mom sat me down and said, "Boy, I'm not raising your child, so you better figure out what you want to do. Man up or drop him at one of those safe places where he can be adopted and get himself a real family." I knew it pained her to say that. Mom loved Abel even more than me, I think, and the last thing she wanted was to lose her grandbaby. But he was my son, my responsibility. I left my last year of high school and started juggling a couple of part-time jobs. It was the real American dream, 50 to 60-hour work weeks, and still couldn't make ends meet. The only reason I kept pushing was my little boy. The world just seemed to be getting worse around us, but I kept clawing my way up. Didn't hang out with my old friends, didn't get involved in any of the old crap I used to do, just kept looking forward and working my tail off. Things started looking up when I met Shayla at one of my janitor jobs. She had a kid around Abel's age too and wanted out of the neighborhood as much as I did. We got together, started setting goals and saving money, and we really thought we were going to make it. Closest we got was when Abel was about 8. We'd gotten married a couple years before and could finally afford to rent a place of our own a few blocks from my mom. It was still in the same neighborhood, but closer to the edge. Shayla landed a great job as a secretary in a law firm, and I was digging ditches for the city. We were finally managing to get by with some money stashed away for the future. We could almost see a way out. I had warned my boy to stay away from the older kids a few houses down. They were no good, I'd say when he asked why. They were dangerous. I didn't tell him it was because they were tangled up with a gang, one of the reasons Shayla and I wanted out in the first place. But maybe I should have. Maybe it would have prevented what happened. I was at work on a Saturday, doing overtime to afford a gift for Shayla's daughter's birthday, so I only found out after it went down. Abel had slipped out of the house and gone to hang out with the cool kids down the road. It should have only been a minute, not long enough for anything bad to happen, and it was broad daylight. Didn't stop some rivals from driving by and firing shots at the group. At my son. He took 2 in the back before he hit the ground. The 2 that were meant for the leader he'd been standing in front of. When I got to the hospital, Abel was in surgery. Walking into the hospital felt like a nightmare. Nothing felt real. Not the hugs from my mom or Shayla, not the updates from the doctor, nothing. I sat in one of those hard plastic chairs against the wall, put my head between my knees, and prayed for God to spare my boy. Shayla and Mom headed to the cafeteria for some coffee while we waited. I stayed put, my eyes locked on the doors, desperate for some sort of explanation. When someone stepped in front of me, I looked up, a mix of anger and gratitude bubbling inside me. I needed an outlet for my frustration, and this guy unwittingly offered himself up for the taking. "Hey!" I snapped, but then I froze. The figure in front of me was tall, draped in a heavy black robe. The hood hid his face, but I was certain there was a skeletal grin lurking there. All he needed was a scythe. Then I blinked. The robes transformed, vibrant in blue and red, adorned with flowers. Beads hung around the skull and tall headdress. Another blink. Now it was a Chinese man, long black beard, official-looking robes, and a cap. Each blink brought a change: a small Indian child, an old woman with wild hair, a large black dog. I hadn't seen most of them before, but I knew their names. Santa Muerta, King Yan, a Yamaduta, Banshee, Black Shuck. Different names, same entity. Death. No, I don't know if I was denying the sight or trying to ward off the creature in front of me. Oh God, oh please, no. It turned toward me, 100 faces in one form. Trying to focus on anyone was like lightning striking my brain. It wasn't real, yet it was the only thing that felt real. I might be losing my mind to grief, but I didn't care. If there was a chance to save Abel, I had to try. Not my boy. I begged, alone in the hallway, while I spoke to something that might not even be there. Anyone else, but not Abel. It continued to stare. Please. Slowly, it raised a hand, at once bony, then dark-skinned, old, young, a paw, and touched my forehead. Suddenly, I wasn't me anymore. I was someone else, someone furious, consumed by hate, a gun heavy and familiar in my hand. I was fearless, hot-blooded, out for vengeance. I was Abel. Older, no longer innocent, flashes of a life whirled before me, drinking, drugs, love and loyalty bought with blood. The gang's colors waved like a flag over it all. Everything went black for a moment, then I was someone else. A pastor filled with peace and generosity. The beloved leader of a congregation, a pillar in the community, a husband, a father, a friend. A reformed gang member who had changed his ways, escaping violence after a drive-by shooting in broad daylight. My body jerked sharply, and I was back in my skin. The figure stood before me, countless eyes fixed on me, waiting. "They're both in there?" I asked weakly. The figure stayed silent and still, but I knew. My boy and that scumbag were both in surgery, but only one would make it out. "You can't know that's what'll happen," I said, defiantly shaking my head. "My son is good. Abel is good. I'll get him out of here. It won't happen." It tilted its head slightly. You don't know. Abel is good. He's good." I started to sob, but it stood there, waiting, expectant. "My boy," I whispered. "Save my boy." And then I was alone. Carter Wright passed away on the table 5 minutes later. He was 16. Abel survived. I don't understand what I saw in that hospital or how real it was. I don't know why I was given that choice when it shouldn't have been mine to make. I tried different churches and temples for answers, but no one could help me understand. Yet, even without that understanding, I told Abel he'd been given a second chance and not to squander it. But it didn't matter. First, he lost his innocence by force, and then he willingly gave up the rest. He craved revenge, knew who to turn to for it, and he was going to get it, whether I approved or not. I had to kick him out at 18 after he pulled a gun on Shayla in our home. Despite all our efforts, all the love we gave him, all the attempts to change things, to move, to shield him from what was always lurking outside our door, he was never my little boy again. He had become everything I'd feared. And now, almost 15 years later, not a day passes without regret for the choice I made in the presence of death. 3 months back, it all started. Those dark patches in the water. I'm chilling at my beachfront cottage, my own little hideout I snagged 3 years ago. The back deck faces the Sound, along the Outer Banks in North Carolina. It's always been my go-to vacation spot, and after my 3rd book hit it big last year, the royalties gave me the green to buy this place. No neighbors here, purposely set up that way. I wanted to write my fourth book in peace and quiet, away from the noise. There's a small pier that extends into the sound right under my deck. The sound of the water gently slapping against the wood does wonders for my creative juices. A few days ago, as I was sitting on the dock, I spotted them for the first time. Those dark spots in the water. Perfect circles about 4 feet wide. 4 of them, roughly 20 feet from where I stood at the pier's edge. The sun was setting, painting the clouds with soft orange hues. The water reflected the light, sparkling like stars on the calm surface. Except for those black circles, they seemed to swallow the light, pulling it in. It was strange. I guessed maybe the water was deeper there. I sipped my water, the ice clinking in my glass like muted chimes. I couldn't figure out what I was seeing. Instead of dwelling on it, I headed inside, determined to finish another page of my book before calling it a night. Outside, 2 more dark spots appeared in the water. The following day, storm clouds rolled in, casting an angry shadow over the sky. I sat by the large bay window, fingers dancing on my keyboard as rain pounded the ocean outside. Most folks don't enjoy rainy days, but for me as a writer, they're my most creative moments. The cozy atmosphere, the steady drumming of rain, the distant thunder, all of it fuels my imagination, and the words just flow like the water from the clouds above. I was watching the waves, brainstorming the next chapter of my book, when I saw those dark circles again. One right at the edge of the pier, another 5 scattered around it. I absent-mindedly tapped my finger on the desk, observing them. They had shifted positions since yesterday. I dismissed my depth theory and wondered if it was a school of fish. Didn't explain the way they absorbed the light, but I wasn't an ocean expert. I rose, granting myself a brief pause from my work, and approached the door. Swinging it open, the shelter above me shielding from the rain, I breathed in the damp air. It was crisp, redolent of fresh rain and the tang of the ocean. As I inhaled, I winced. The wind carried a new, repugnant odor, something acrid and pungent, searing my nostrils with its offensive stench. I shielded my face with my hand, trying not to retch. It was sharp, akin to vinegar, and my eyes welled up. I slammed the door shut, retreating inside. I reached my desk and took my seat, wiping away the remnants of the smell from my nose. I gazed out at the water. The dark patches in the water had drawn nearer to the house. That night, sleep eluded me. I awoke merely an hour after retiring to bed, my mind refusing to return to peaceful slumber. I ventured to my back deck, standing in the darkness, observing the water, allowing the rhythmic lapping of waves to calm my thoughts. It was a practice I had adopted when sleep played tricks on my mind, leaving me with a jumble of thoughts and anxieties. The wind tousled my hair, a warm breeze imbued with the scent of the sea. The moon spilled its luminous glow across the water, illuminating the tiny crests of rolling waves. I listened as they collided against the pier before me and inhaled the ambience. That's when I heard humming. Initially, I dismissed it as mere wind, but as I honed my hearing, I realized it emanated from the water. It was faint, yet there was a distinct melody to the deep, resonant vocals. It resembled chanting. My gaze settled on the dark patches of water. I hadn't even noticed them in the night, but upon closer inspection, I could discern the moonlight outlining their murky edges. Yet no light penetrated their core. Instead, it remained as black as the farthest reaches of space. The humming undoubtedly emanated from those obsidian patches of still water. Something about the ominous sound sent shivers down my spine, a slow, mournful tune carried on the wind with haunting intent. It raised the hairs on the back of my neck, prompting me to lean over the railing for a closer look. The circles hugged the wooden edge of my house, meeting the waterline just beneath my deck where a wall stood. Extending from that wall, the pier sprawled out, floating on the Sound's surface like a crimson carpet. I descended the porch steps and strolled beneath the deck toward the pier. My bare feet patted softly on the wood, and the hum grew more distinct. Glancing to my right, I noticed a few circles gently swaying back and forth, as if carried by the tide. What the hell? I thought, peering out. That's when the water's surface stirred. It came with a sudden splash and a spray of white foam. From the center of each circle, something emerged fleetingly. The abruptness and depth of darkness prevented me from discerning what it was, but it terrified me to the core. It all unfolded seamlessly and in unison. At that precise moment, they'd all mirrored the exact same action. I didn't grasp the significance, didn't know if I was dealing with creatures or natural phenomena, but a profound discomfort washed over me. I hurried back to the deck, my ears filled with the eerie, mournful hum. Just as I was about to re-enter, the terrible stench hit me once more. I gagged as the wind carried it into my throat, my eyes welling up. Desperate to escape the dreadful smell, I yanked the door open. Inside, I stumbled and slammed the door shut. I leaned against it, breathing heavily. Then a heavy thunk echoed from the pier outside. It arrived in a rush of water and weight, a loud declaration in the night. My eyes widened as I turned to peer out the sliding glass door. In the moonlight, I saw the origin of those dark circles. It sprouted from an enormous conch shell, its coiling spirals so dark they seemed to illuminate the night around it. Wriggling out of the opening was a lengthy coil of pink flesh, glistening with dripping water. It was thick and oozy, resembling an infected tongue, and at the end of its 2-foot expanse was a human torso. It emerged from the pulsating, shimmering muscle, its face bloated and waterlogged. Its eyes were abyssal, and a grin slashed across its noseless face like a deep wound. And it hummed. The notes wafted through the night air, filling me with paralyzing dread. It was a melody of death, a prelude to carnage. Dragging itself along the pier toward my house, it used long, fingerless slabs of writhing flesh. They smacked wetly against the wood, the grinding sound screeching in my ears. Even from behind the door, I caught a whiff of the creature. It was the same foul, pestilent stench I had smelled earlier. In sheer horror, I witnessed yet another creature emerge from the water, humming and grinning, hoisting its colossal shell like a ship's hull. Water cascaded over the pier in massive waves as it followed the first one. The humming intensified, its volume rising, and an unexplainable urge to stand and listen overcame me. The notes churned my stomach, yet I felt compelled to await the creature's approach. Suddenly, the full horror of the situation crashed over me like a tidal wave. Snapping out of my trance, I clamped my hands over my ears. I couldn't allow them to reach me. I had to escape. If they reached me, I knew I wouldn't survive till morning. I had no clue what these entities were or what they wanted, but terror surged in my throat like bile. I seized my car keys as another one pulled itself onto the barrier beneath my house. I could hear it flopping onto the strip of sand beneath my deck, and I knew time was running out. I practically kicked my front door open and sprinted to the car. Jamming the key into the lock, I twisted it, flinging the door open. A crash echoed from inside, signaling that the first one had broken in. The thought of the creature pulling itself through my house sent adrenaline coursing through me. I leaped into the car, starting it and slamming the gears into reverse. I flicked on my headlights, my heart thundering in my chest. One of them loomed in the open doorway, its worm-like arms sliding along the frame. It grinned at me, a deep hum echoing toward me. For an instant, I almost retreated into the driveway, but a surge of fresh adrenaline forced reason upon my befuddled mind. I revved the engine and sped toward town. To this day, I remain clueless about those entities. I shared my experience with the police and local wildlife rangers, but they dismissed me. To them, I was just a new resident, unfamiliar with the ocean's mysteries. I put the house up for sale and haven't returned since. I don't dare. I attempted discussing the dark circles in the water with local fishermen, but they shut me down the moment I mentioned it. They warned me against speaking of such things, silencing me with a swift wave of their hands. Their eyes held a look that frightened me, yet also reassured me that I wasn't insane. I don't comprehend what I witnessed, what those creatures were, or what they sought. Just the thought terrifies me. But I know one thing. I'll never go near the ocean again. Somehow, I sense I'd hear humming. Somehow, I believe those creatures would return, determined to catch the one that escaped. While on the job, my phone buzzed with a call that shattered my world. The news was devastating. My son, along with my wife, had met with a horrific accident during their family visit. He was riding on a utility trailer that flipped, landing on his head. Rushing to the hospital, navigating through lanes and intersections, I finally met my wife in the lobby after 3 grueling hours. We held each other tightly, her eyes filled with tears. "Brace yourself," she whispered. I can't recall stepping into the elevator or being led to my son's bedside by my wife. Suddenly, the 3 of us were there, surrounded by machines and beeping monitors. Wires were attached to his scalp, making him look like some kind of scientific experiment. Soon, a pair of doctors entered. The older one began speaking, though the full weight of the situation hadn't sunk in. I caught phrases like multiple skull fractures and internal bleeding. The younger doctor, a woman, gently informed us that we should reach out to family and friends. His injuries were severe, and the prognosis was bleak. As we sat by his side, memories flooded my mind about how we arrived at this point and how unjust life seemed. From a young age of 18 months, he'd been in and out of hospitals due to various health issues. However, a few years ago, a diagnosis struck us like a blow: autism. Honestly, I had been in denial ever since I heard it 4 years ago. He was on the higher end of the spectrum, but it didn't make things any easier. Yes, he was intellectually sharp, always had been. But socially, he struggled. Making friends was hard for him. And he often displayed fits of anger and embarrassing behavior in public. I couldn't even recall the last time we dined out together as a family. The weight of the diagnosis had been pressing on us. We attempted different therapies, but they provided only temporary relief. Medications came with their own challenges. Now I had to sit there, helpless, and watch my son slip away before my eyes. Time passed, marked by doctors and nurses checking the machines. One of them monitored brainwave activity, but there seemed to be little happening there. The hospital became our new residence, neither of us willing to leave his side. One day, the doctors came in, telling us they needed to talk. No changes in his brainwaves. Frankly, even if he pulls through, he'll be in a vegetative state for life. They asked if we'd consider signing an organ donation form. My wife broke down as the doctors left. Soon my own tears followed, and we wept together at our son's bedside. By morning, if nothing changed, we decided to sign the organ donation consent form. Later, in the dead of night, I woke up, my neck aching from the hospital chair. My wife was still asleep. I took a walk, passing a couple of nurses at their desk. The pediatric ward was silent, except for the machine's beeps. In a visitor's lounge, I saw a man in one of the chairs, facing my way. "Didn't hear you come in," I said. "No problem. Rough night?" he asked. I sat, gazing at the ceiling. You could say that. He stood up, then sat next to me. "I can help you, Scott." His attire screamed corporate executive. His cane, carved like a distorted face, caught my eye. "What do you mean?" Leaning closer, he said, "I can help you." "How do you know my name? We've never met." I shifted away from him. He backed off. "Not important now. What matters is what I can do for you." "Tonight, what can you do?" "Save your son, man," he exclaimed, standing. "I can save your boy." I glanced at the door, expecting a nurse to rush in, but no one came. Turning back to him, he awaited my response. "How?" I asked, incredulous. He smiled, retaking his seat. "Simple exchange, my friend. And as a bonus, I'll make him more normal." "Normal?" "Let's be honest, Scott. You wished he was like other boys, into sports, just like you used to be. Sometimes you don't even like him, do you?" He was right. Despite my love, that word had shaken my world. And yes, I'd longed for him to be more normal. I hesitated before responding. "How?" He had caught my attention. "All you gotta do is say yes. Done deal." "Just yes? No blood or contract?" He chuckled heartily. "Not too messy. My deals work different." "Deals? Who are you?" He leaned in, revealing deep black eyes. "No angel, that's for sure." He laughed again. Despite my disbelief in such supernatural concepts, his presence horrified me. Yet something selfish compelled me to give the only answer I could. "All right, yes. Good choice. Your boy will wake up tomorrow, fit as a fiddle, just as promised. You mentioned an exchange. In due time. Enjoy your second chance with your boy. Pleasure doing business." And just like that, he vanished before my eyes. I dashed into the hallway, but he was gone. The next day, I woke to the most beautiful sound, "Daddy." Doctors called it a miracle, but they didn't know what I had done. Amidst tears and laughter, a creeping dread enveloped me. I didn't know the price, but I knew it would be steep, given the source of the miracle. The following months were tough, despite our son's return. His recovery was slow, filled with painful therapy. We had him back, but a sense of foreboding lingered. Our son changed. He became calmer. His outbursts vanished. But not all was well. He lost interest in his old passions. His books and movies gathered dust. He was a mere shadow of himself. Everyone believed he'd recover, but deep down I knew. Autism was his identity, his essence. I had taken that from him. It was his soul. I have to do something. I'll find that demon and make him fix my son completely. I have something he wants, something he took in the first place. Exchanging my soul won't be hard. After all, I gave away my sons without a second thought. I was just 7 years old when my mom passed away, but that night is etched into my memory as if it happened yesterday. Maybe it's the familiarity of being back in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the same weathered wooden beams stretching across the ceiling, hearing the familiar groans and creaks of the old house settling in, and catching the faint scent of aged dust mingled with fresh paint. It all transports me back to my early years. I need to spill this out quickly because, truthfully, I'm scared, and I need help, guidance, or perhaps just someone else to bear witness. I'm unsure. After my mom's death, my dad and I moved away from this house, but evidently he never sold it. He passed away last month after a long battle with prostate cancer, and it brings me some solace knowing he's reunited with my mom. He never remarried. I think he missed her every day until his last breath. I had no idea the house was still in his name until the executor of his will informed me. Apparently, it had remained empty all these years. He never sold or rented it out, but he meticulously maintained it, tending to the lawn and garden. Strangely, the house appears just as it did in my childhood memories. To cut it short, I decided to move in. It's far too spacious for just me and my dog, Noodle. Yet something inside me prevents me from selling it, despite my friend's insistence. I realize it's irrational. The place is a 45-minute drive from the city where I work, but my dad held on to it for all those years. Selling it feels like disrespecting his memory. Now, back to 2001, the night my mom passed away. I remember waking up in the early morning hours, a sliver of crescent moon still visible in the sky. Much like now, I was bundled up under layers of blankets and quilts, and my faithful dog was by my side. Only he wasn't sleeping. Instead, he was fixated on his reflection in the mirror. I should mention that this behavior wasn't out of the ordinary for Toby. God rest his doggy soul, he was always a bit peculiar, often found sitting and gazing at himself in the mirror. He'd sit there contentedly for hours, wagging his tail as if his own reflection was the most fascinating sight in the world. However, that night, it instantly unsettled me. In the week leading up to that night, Toby had been acting strangely whenever he looked at himself in the mirror. His usually cheerful demeanor would transform, and he'd emit a low growl. This peculiar routine had awakened me for several nights in a row, and it was beginning to send shivers down my spine. Tonight, it was worse than ever. Toby wasn't merely glancing into the mirror. He wasn't just growling. His gaze was fixed on it with an intensity I'd never witnessed before. His fur was raised, every hair on his spine standing on end, and he crouched low to the ground, a mix of threat and fear in his stance. I was about to softly call out to him when he suddenly erupted into snarls, displaying a level of aggression I had never seen in my once gentle childhood companion. Simultaneously, my mom's screams pierced the night. Her bedroom was just across the hallway, and even with my door slightly ajar, her piercing shrieks sounded as if she were right beside me. I was just a kid then, but I'll forever regret what I did next. I hid. Despite being the only one in the house, my dad was deployed in Afghanistan at the time. I don't know why I didn't get up, why I didn't try to help, or even call 911. Amidst my dog's barks and my mom's cries, all I did was burrow under my covers and conceal myself. Even after the screams ceased, I stayed concealed. Even when morning broke, I remained hidden. It wasn't until mid-morning, during a welfare check by the police, that they were able to coax me out of my bed. My dad returned home early. He never disclosed what happened to my mom. Even in later years, he'd just say he didn't want to talk about it. As far as I knew, she had simply vanished. Her funeral was a week later, and we vacated the house within a month. Fast forward to the present. I've been back in this house for a few weeks now, and damn, I hope this doesn't sound crazy, but my dog Noodle has been acting strangely. She's been spending a lot of time staring into the mirror, just like Toby did. Before we moved here, she never had this habit. Initially, I found it amusing, but she's been doing it more frequently. The past few nights, I've woken up to find her fixed on her reflection, growling softly, the intensity growing. What compelled me to share this is how she's behaving tonight. I can sense her unease. She's pacing before the mirror, snarling, her fur standing on end. And I noticed something. The mirror is angled in a way that when you stand directly in front of it, the reflection must point directly at my open bedroom door. My dog isn't staring at herself. She's gazing at whatever is just beyond my door. I'm in my bed right now, and from my vantage point, I can't see into the hallway. So far, I haven't mustered the courage to get up and investigate, but I know it's what I need to do. Damn, I'm terrified. I'm a 21-year-old gal living up in Ontario, Canada. This tale happened when I was 19, in the middle of going for my G license, the final step for a full driver's license in our province. It was spring break from my university, and I was back home with my folks, feeling adventurous. I decided to sign up at the nearest Service Ontario to take my ultimate road test. The test was set for 8 a.m. sharp. When I showed up, it was 7:30, and the sky was still dark, thanks to the overcast weather. I stood in line at the counter to check in. A grouchy, middle-aged lady, with deep circles under her eyes, told me to just grab a seat and wait for my instructor to come find me. Feeling a bit jittery, I squirmed in the uncomfortable chair, waiting for someone to approach me. Almost right away, a tall, sturdy dude in a beige polo shirt came up and introduced himself. Without much thought, I shared my name and shook his hand. He said he was my driving instructor and asked me to call him Chuck. Seemed like a friendly enough guy, but I couldn't help but notice his head was a bit off, like Sloth from Goonies, you know. As we headed to the parking lot, I naturally walked toward my car. "What are you doing?" I heard him say behind me. I turned around, and he had this incredulous, amused smirk on his face. He then informed me we'd be using his car and pointed to an old beat-up station wagon. Weird, I thought. For all my previous road tests, I'd used my own car. Too anxious to dwell on it, I just shrugged and got in. Right away, I noticed a strange smell, not exactly disgusting like blood or urine, but more like mold or rotting garbage. Again, I didn't give it much thought. After all, this was a road test car, so it probably didn't get much upkeep. We pulled out of the plaza after some struggles turning the engine over and started navigating through traffic. This Service Ontario was right next to a super long main road, busy as heck that morning. After a few minutes, it started to drizzle, not quite raining, and I wasn't sure if I should turn on the wipers or not. That's when I realized the guy hadn't given me any directions. No instructions to change lanes or take a smaller road for parallel parking, like other instructors did. He just stared blankly ahead, chewing on his thumb. So, like it was about 10 minutes later, and we were getting to the edge of the city, right? I could hear this dude mumbling to himself. At first, I tried to pay attention, thinking he might be giving me directions or something, but nah, he was just muttering nonsense under his breath. I could only catch one word he kept saying over and over: Jesus. Now I was practically freaking out. My anxiety skyrocketed as we moved farther away from the houses and people. Finally, he spoke up, telling me to take the next right. I did it, and instantly regretted it. The road went nowhere, just ended near some train tracks with metal containers and empty buildings. Then he told me to park and cut the engine. We were totally out of sight and earshot of anyone. We sat there for what felt like ages, rain pouring hard on the windshield. He stopped mumbling and started chewing on his thumbnail again. I slowly slipped my left hand into my pocket, feeling for my keys. "You're really pretty," he suddenly said. His eyes met mine for a sec before shamelessly staring at my chest. "It's wrong, though," he mumbled, still staring. "You women shouldn't provoke folks like that. Jesus says it's wrong." Just to give you an idea of how unexpected this was, I was wearing a wool sweater. Nothing revealing. And I'm hardly endowed, so I didn't expect such creepy ogling. "Huh? Shouldn't we get back to the road test?" I asked, fear in my voice. Finally, he took his eyes off my chest and reached into the glove compartment. "You just got one more thing to do," he said, pulling out something wrapped in black cloth, which he started to unfold. My heart must have stopped. My mouth opened, but no scream came out. In his hand, right at me, was a needle, a damn syringe. He grabbed my arm with the other hand and started leaning in, the needle getting closer. His yellow eyes stared into mine, a twisted, amused smirk on his lips. Without panicking or shedding a tear, I slashed my keys into his eye with the other hand, somehow avoiding getting pricked by the needle. He yelled, "Let go of me," and I bolted out of the car, running for my life. Behind me, barely audible over the pounding rain, I heard him yelling, threatening that I'd fail the test if I didn't get back. I kept running. I ran until I reached an intersection with people around. I stayed there for a while until I saw that same old station wagon speeding through a red light. After 15 minutes of trying to calm down, I walked to the nearest bus stop and hopped on a bus home. Luckily, I had some change in my pocket since I had left my purse with my credit cards and phone in that creep's car. I had no intention of telling anyone about what went down. I know, dumb, but I just didn't want to relive that horror. My plan was to get my dad's car later when the center was closed. But while I was canceling my credit cards over the phone and realizing the car wasn't there, my dad overheard and questioned me. I broke down crying and told him everything. Furious, he got on the phone and called the driving center. Sitting at the kitchen table, I heard him chewing out whoever was on the other end, threatening to call the cops and demanding to speak to my supposed driving instructor. Then my dad asked me to describe the guy as best as I could. After a brief silence, the woman on the other end told me no one by that name worked there. According to her, I was supposed to take my road test with an instructor named Maggie Sumter, and my test had been rescheduled since Sumter couldn't find me. When she said that, I felt like my heart was going to stop. That man wasn't even an instructor. My dad and I filed a report with the local police. Unfortunately, I couldn't recall the guy's license plate number, and he never gave me his full name. To this day, he's never been caught, and I still haven't taken my G road test. Yo, listen up and listen good, especially if you're about to doze off. Don't you dare ignore the knocks. I'm telling you straight from someone who made that mistake and regrets it every day. So here's the deal. I was 8 years old, a real troublemaker, always bucking against authority. No wonder my folks thought I was just trying to dodge bedtime, right? After all, I'd been giving them a run for their money all day, not following a single order. But I swear that knocking was real. It would come right when I was about to pass out, not fully awake, not completely asleep. Let me clarify. It didn't happen every single night, but when it did, I was just drifting off. 4 quick knocks on wood. Knock, 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 and bam, I was wide awake. Like any kid, I'd sprint out of my room, straight into my parents' arms, who were always exasperated, dragging me back to bed, and proving there was nothing lurking under it or hiding in my closet. Eventually, I learned to ignore the knocking and push myself to fall asleep again. Yeah, it was a pain to check my bedroom door, just in case someone was actually knocking, but I managed to doze off eventually. Like I said, I was always bouncing off the walls. Even today, caffeine sends me into overdrive, so you can imagine my folks didn't pay much attention to the random cuts and bruises I'd wake up with. They scolded me, thinking I was just clumsy, but I couldn't explain how I got those injuries. As I got older, the cuts and bruises kept coming, even though I wasn't playing around outside anymore. I saw a doc, and she said I probably had sensitive skin, prone to bruising. But that couldn't explain the fresh cuts on my arms and legs when I woke up, right? In college, I met Kristen, my first girlfriend. She freaked out a bit when she saw my injuries at first, but I'd assured her it was my delicate skin, not some self-harm craziness. We'd been together for 3 weeks when I heard the knocks again while lying next to her. She didn't stir, so I decided to skip checking the door. The last thing I needed was her thinking I was nuts. She was everything to me, and I loved her to bits. So I rolled over and drifted off to sleep. Yo, this massive beast, it grabbed me, man, yanked me down on the cold, wet ground. Them sharp rocks scraped my bare back, pain shooting through me. Right on time today, babe, she snarled, her hairy paw dragging over my chest, them 4-inch claws digging into my skin. Her stench choked me as I begged her to let me go. Nah, babe, not today. We got all the time we need today. Special day, you know. She's towering like 9 feet tall, weighing a ton, and I knew I'd get squashed like a bug. Her paw slid lower, getting real intimate, and that ogre face leaned in. Lips parted to show a blood-red snake tongue, ready to taste me. Her nasty breath nearly made me puke as she got closer. I twisted and turned, trying to break free, but her powerful paw slammed down on my pelvic region, keeping me in place. I screamed in pain, and she grinned, her tongue inching closer to my mouth. Suddenly, the whole world shook. The beast slid off me, like some mighty force pulled her away. No, she roared, trying to grab me again, but she faded away as the shaking got worse. Wake up, Scott. Kristen shook me awake. You're having a night. Her voice trailed off as I turned, soaked in cold sweat. Her face went pale, and she screamed. I tried to reach out, but she scrambled out of bed, flicking on the light. Your face, Scott. What happened? I felt the pain then. My face was burning, and my chest was a mess. Blood-soaked sheets? Man. I ran to the bathroom. The sheets stuck to me, and saw my face split open, deep scratches running down. Miraculously, my eye was spared, but my face was wrecked. Kristen called an ambulance, and the docs stitched me back up. Somehow, she stuck with me, even after that horrifying incident scared me up. I finally spilled about the knocks I'd been hearing for years, apologizing for not telling her sooner. She promised she'd stay up with me whenever the knocks came. I cried, overwhelmed by her love. So Kristen and I pushed through, man. Nights without sleep? Yeah, there've been plenty, but I'm still here. I can feel that beast's anger lurking, and I know if she shows up, it's curtains for me. I pray every night I won't hear those knocks when I drift off. When I hear about folks passing in their sleep, I wonder if it's really peaceful. For me, it's a death worse than any other. You can ignore hunger, thirst, or even a bursting bladder as you fall asleep, but never, ever ignore the knocks. In our first story, a curious discovery unlocks a hidden realm. And in our second tale, a journey into the unknown takes a dark turn. Get ready for 2 thrilling narratives that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Coming up next, don't miss a single moment of these captivating stories. Subscribe, like, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss out. When I was younger, I was all about music, parties, and getting high on various substances to enhance the experience. I'm in the same boat as many who let loose and embraced hedonism. It wasn't surprising that I ended up at festivals with friends who shared my wild mindset back then. Just to be clear, and I don't say this with pride, I've had my share of drug experiences. I don't really regret it, but there was one incident that made me quit for good. My fellow party animals back then didn't understand why I stopped, and I couldn't be bothered to explain it to them. They would have probably thought it was just a drug-induced hallucination. I've had those before due to sleep deprivation and redosing, but nothing compared to this. It was the beginning of summer, and my friend Rachel told me they were going to an EDM festival a few states away. I won't say where exactly, but I've already given away enough by mentioning my home country. I jumped at the chance and quickly got a ticket during the third batch release. It was a 3-day weekend festival, so we needed tents and supplies. Naturally, I had everything ready since this wasn't my first rodeo. I won't bore you with the details of the road trip, but we were all hyped. I was with my pals Chris, Robbie, and of course Rachel. We hadn't been to this festival before, so we had some intense discussions about how to sneak in our stash of pills and powders. I had some MDMA powder, commonly known as ecstasy in pill form, and a few LSD blotters, planning to candy flip the whole time. I went with the classic balsing technique, which is just what it sounds like, stuffing your baggies into your boxers to get past security. For folks like us, this place was heaven on earth. It was set up in a rural area, surrounded by rolling hills and woods on one side. There were like a dozen massive tents set up in a semicircle, each blasting EDM, but with different artists in the lineup. It was paradise back then. The first day was a blur. I wasted no time taking that MDMA, and it kept me dancing for a solid 8 hours. Redosing isn't advisable, but it's hard to resist when everyone around you is doing it. Peer pressure at its finest. By the end of the day, we'd merged with another group of like-minded folks, and we decided to camp together. Robbie had this brilliant idea of having a campfire, but we'd have to move to a more secluded spot due to all the rules and regulations. So we packed up our tents and headed into the woods at the edge of the property. I was skeptical at first, but we stumbled upon a perfect spot on top of a hill. From there, we could see the treetops across the forest and enjoy the fiery summer sunset. Plus, we were far away from any nosy security personnel. Once our tents were set up, we wasted no time cracking open some drinks. The sun was setting, and despite the impending come-down, I felt amazing. We gathered twigs and sticks easily in the forest and used beer packaging to start a fire. Hey, want some? Chris, who was sitting next to me on a fallen log by the campfire, offered me a bag of shardy powder, which I immediately recognized as ketamine. How could I refuse? It was the perfect moment for a little dissociation. Do you even need to ask? A big old grin spread across his face, and he whipped out his car keys to grab that powder. He snorted up a hefty pile of the stuff before passing it to me. I kinda crushed the bag a bit, something Chris forgot to do beforehand, then whipped out a little snowy mountain and basically inhaled it. I tasted that drip a bit, but compared to what I'd been hitting earlier, it wasn't all that bad. It hit me right away. Whoa, damn, dude, feels like they'd use this to tranquilize a frickin' rhino, I said, my words starting to jumble together. I know, right? Didn't even crack it open earlier, been saving it for this moment. Robbie, with a knack for finding intoxicants, basically teleported onto the log next to Chris. Maybe it was just a side effect of the drug, but his sudden appearance cracked me and Chris up. Didn't know there was an isomer that turned you into an asshole, he chuckled. Yeah, it's called dickhetamine, Chris said, barely holding back his laughter. Well, I'm feeling a little too polite right now, mind sharing? Of course, Chris replied, passing the stuff over to Robbie. Then something different washed over me. It wasn't nausea or anxiety, but it was like the late-day sunlight was pulsating. I could feel the rays as if they had weight and substance, waxing and waning in intensity as they swept over my face. I'd never felt anything like it on this type of drug before, so I figured it was just a mix of whatever other chemicals were running through my veins at that moment. You know, tripping out. I brushed it off and kept the party going. Someone from the other group busted out a speaker, a heavy, bulky thing that sent bass vibrating through our bones. With everyone dancing around the camp, I figured one more hit of MDMA couldn't hurt. I'm not sure how long I danced in pure bliss, but when I finally plopped down on the log for a breather, the horizon was already ablaze with deep orange. "You need a cold one," Robbie asked, pulling off that teleportation trick again. "What the? Damn, dude, he got me again." "Heh, it's just one of my natural talents. You want one or not?" Yeah, crack one for me," I gasped, exhaustion from the day finally catching up to me. Robbie popped open a can and handed it to me, though it wasn't as cold as he promised. We sat there shooting the breeze for a bit, gazing at the leaves rustling below, catching the last bits of dusk light. It felt tranquil, and I knew the money I spent was well worth it. At some point, I got distracted by a faint sound in the distance. Again, I didn't think much of it. I'd had my share of hallucinations after a heavy drug sesh, and I'd seen worse. But the sound didn't fade away after a while, so I strained my ears to make out what it was. A slight breeze picked up, making it a bit harder, but after a short time, I could definitely make something out. Machinery. That's the first word that came to mind to describe what I was hearing. The clanging and whirring of fuel-powered contraptions at a construction site. I hadn't even noticed Robbie was gone until I glanced over and saw only a few of us still outside, 2 people making out sloppily, and Chris and Robbie still dancing. I sat and listened for a few minutes. I could swear the sounds were getting closer, but they were still too far off to be sure. I checked the time, then got a bit confused. 10 p.m. I looked back up at the sky. The sun hadn't even dipped below the horizon yet, but the sky was definitely getting darker, with stars starting to show. A thought crossed my mind. This stuff has me tripping. That was absolutely true, but the whole situation just felt off in some way. At that moment, I glanced down and saw Rachel down the slope of the hill, her back turned towards the camp. Squinting in puzzlement, I called out, "Hey, Rach, is that you? What's going on down there?" No response came, not even a hint of movement to show she heard me. Worry started to creep in, thinking she might have overdone it, and I pushed myself up from the log to go check on her. Rachel's posture was all kinds of strange. Her shoulders drooped so low it seemed like they'd been dislocated, and her head hung backward. I quickened my pace, growing more anxious about her condition, when, in a moment of carelessness, I tripped over a root poking out of the dirt. I tumbled head over heels, almost comically, rolling down to the bottom of the hill in a cloud of dust and twigs. Thankfully, it wasn't too high or steep, but it was far enough that when I looked back up, the campfire was just a faint orange glow spilling over the hill's edge. I was rattled at first, but as I took in my surroundings, Rachel was nowhere to be seen. Could she be so messed up that she didn't even notice my clumsy tumble right by her? But then, where was she? No one was on the slope above me, and I couldn't spot anyone else around. I figured out this was one of those annoying come-down hallucinations. I was annoyed, seeing my crisp white sneakers now caked in a fine layer of brown dust, along with the rest of my clothes. Even with the realization, I found little comfort sitting there by myself, alone in a forest that was quickly growing dark. I picked myself up, dusted off my clothes, and before heading back to camp, something caught my eye. The trees were blocking most of the sky now, but the sun was still there, seemingly in the exact same spot as before. From somewhere beyond the trees above, there were these lines reaching upward towards the sun. Super thin and barely visible, but the longer I stared, the more obvious they became. They moved in the oddest way, like dangling cables or tubes bending under the influence of gravity, swaying in graceful arcs and connecting to the sun's edge. I wasn't too quick to chalk it up to crazy visuals, though. I watched with curiosity as more and more of these tubes attached themselves to the sun. The sun itself. It seemed brighter now. It was a dim orange earlier, typical of sunsets, but now it looked more like dawn, almost blindingly bright. I thought I even saw a faint bluish tinge, but with the drugs messing with my vision, I didn't dwell on that idea. I forced myself to look away and head back up the hill. My friends were probably wondering where I'd disappeared to, though they might not even have noticed I was gone. I clambered back over the top to find only Chris and Robbie by the dwindling campfire. My niece snapped a twig as I landed, causing Chris to turn toward the sound. He jumped when he saw me, then settled into confusion as he glanced between me and Robbie, waiting for someone to explain. "What?" I called out, not sure why they seemed so bewildered. "Tell? Man, stop messing around. I thought you were some homeless guy or something," Chris said, sighing in relief once he realized what was happening. "What are you talking about?" I went down there to find Rachel. Wait, where's Rachel? "She went to bed, like 20 minutes ago. And you turned in, like, an hour ago," Robbie chimed in. "What, Robbie? I've been down in the forest for..." I checked my watch. 12 a.m. 2 hours. Chris and Robbie exchanged glances, a touch of fear in their eyes. Without a word, Chris got up and went to my tent, only to find it empty when he unzipped it. "What the hell?" "Both of us saw you go into your tent and zip it up," Chris exclaimed, his worry evident. "Man, I think we're all just seriously messed up," I laughed, devoid of humor. They grunted in agreement, but I couldn't help but wonder about what Chris had just said. Had they both hallucinated me being in the tent at the same time? "Hey, Tell, you okay? You're sweating buckets," Robbie asked, tossing a water bottle my way. "You haven't forgotten about staying hydrated, have you?" Now that he mentioned it, I did start to feel strangely warm. I snatched the bottle and chugged it down in a matter of seconds, then got up and headed over to the communal log bench. Conversation dwindled at that point, and we opted to hit Robbie's bong a few times to ease our nerves. It didn't even cross my mind back then to ask if they saw the same things I was seeing. I was just too caught up in the moment. Both of them turned in for the night, but I told them I wanted to hang outside a bit longer for some relaxation. Relaxation, however, was nowhere to be found. To my dismay, the sun still hadn't set, stubbornly hanging above the horizon, and I could hear those mechanical noises again, echoing across the valley. This time, there was no doubt they were louder and clearer. Logically, that meant whatever was making those noises had moved closer. I was still convinced it was some grand hallucination when I heard a voice. No, that doesn't quite capture it. I couldn't make out any words, but I somehow knew deep down that amidst the distant clanging, I'd heard a voice. Not as a separate entity, but as if the entire industrial soundscape had synchronized in a way that formed a low, metallic voice. Again, no clear words, just a jumbled murmuring that reverberated inside my head. Then I noticed the weirdest sight yet. Despite the glaring abnormality of the pale sun hanging in the pitch-black night, I squinted and saw faint lines drifting across its surface, forming patterns that were slightly dimmer than the rest of the sun. As I focused more intensely, how can I even put it into words? I'd tripped a million times before, but this was nothing like the colorful swirling visuals I was used to. It was like I was staring at an immense, infinitely intricate fractal, unfolding in a tangle of brighter and dimmer light. The longer I stared, the more those noises synchronized, building until I unmistakably heard the words. This one. It sounded so precise, no way my mind had just cooked it up from a random combination of sounds. It came in waves, like a subtle tinnitus fluctuating in intensity to form those exact words. The sky had turned into a black ocean scattered with stars, a stark contrast to the intense, cold ball of light in front of me. The heat was unmistakable now, as I wiped sweat from my eyes to keep staring. I decided to smoke more weed and down more beer, hoping to knock myself out and go to sleep. This was getting way too bizarre, even for someone experienced in partying like myself. I packed a bowl and took a slow, deep hit. As much as I wanted to look away, my eyes were glued to the unsettling sight before me. The squirming lines had grown wider and much dimmer, almost a dark gray. I scrambled to down a few beers, and halfway through the third one, a loud clank made me jump, causing me to drop the can to the ground. I furrowed my brow, as if silently pleading with the world to just stop whatever it was doing. I looked up one last time to see the patterns had stopped all motion and were now nearly black, motionless and gaping. To my horror, they started moving again. No, the lines themselves remained still, but the darkness within them writhed and started to fall. Tiny black shapes were pouring out of the sun right in front of my eyes, descending into the trees below. At this point, in the haze of my drug-induced delusion, my belief that this was all a hallucination was waning. They kept pouring out until I could see trees in the distance trembling, leaves rustling as if a stampede of something was shaking them. I couldn't muster the will to control myself anymore, and I began to hyperventilate. The swaying treetops were getting closer, and a faint, eerie chittering sound became audible, like what I'd imagine insects would sound like if they could laugh. The tree's movement was now less than half a mile away. I was paralyzed. Whether I was fully delirious at this point or not was the least of my concerns. My eyes didn't seem to be playing tricks on me. Whatever was moving through the trees below was moving quickly, and within 20 seconds, they were within earthshot. The sounds emanating from the darkness became unbearable, like nails scraping my eardrums, and then silence. Movement ceased, and silence enveloped everything. The campfire still flickered dimly, preventing my eyes from adjusting to the swirling darkness weaving between the tree trunks below. The crackling of the embers disturbed the thick, oppressive silence that hung over the camp. Suddenly, the sound of a twig snapping somewhere to my left broke my petrified state, and I turned my head in the direction of the noise. Rachel lingered at the edge of the fire's glow. Well, to call that entity Rachel would insult her very being. It resembled a creation by someone utterly unfamiliar with human anatomy, its limbs in a constant state of flux, as if it were perpetually trying to correct itself. It took a step forward, sending me tumbling off the log and onto my back. Rolling backward, I hoisted myself up, but it hadn't advanced any further. Instead, it parted its mouth or mouths. I couldn't discern how many it possessed at once, constantly splitting and merging, reshaping itself. Inside, there was only darkness. It began emitting these dreadful, clicking, and ringing sounds that ebbed and flowed, never settling on a single tone. And much like the sounds before, they began to harmonize into something vaguely intelligible. Whatever this entity was, it couldn't quite mimic Rachel's voice. Still, I couldn't make out any distinct words. Imagine someone who doesn't understand English listening to the language being spoken. That's how I felt, hearing this monstrosity, an auditory assault. After a moment, it seemed to give up and fell silent. Its mouths instead multiplied, growing and expanding across its skin like Swiss cheese, obliterating any semblance of humanity. My eyes strained trying to focus on the presence before me. Nothing in my vocabulary could accurately depict this being. I can't even recall how it looked. The form was mentally incompatible. I remembered dark lines and shapes, both sharp and organic, shifting in more than 3 dimensions, certainly. Something appeared to peer out from the spasmodic darkness, resembling monochrome faces overlapping, distinct yet unified. They gazed upon me with profound sorrow, lips parting as if to speak, yet any words were swallowed by that incomprehensible void. After what felt like an eternity but was likely mere seconds, it began moving once more. And as it moved, it assumed a new form. Skin, hair, nails, fabric, all sliding and shifting, until the logo on my polo shirt emerged, rising from beneath a dark fold. As this occurred, movements stirred beneath the darkness below, countless shifting footsteps disturbing the forest floor. I wish I could provide a more detailed account, but that was my breaking point. I let go of the still smoldering pipe, spun around, and sprinted in the opposite direction. I ran and ran across the festival grounds, past a vibrant sea of tents and inebriated onlookers, only to slip on a frigid puddle of someone's vomit and fall face first into the trash-strewn earth. I'd regained consciousness in a medical support tent at 11:30 a.m. Observing my arms, they appeared severely sunburned, and the sight triggered a surge of pain across my skin. I winced and surveyed my surroundings. A staff member approached me, a friendly-looking middle-aged man, holding a bottle of lotion and another of water. "Hey, kid, how you feeling? You got some nasty burns there. Forget your sunscreen?" he inquired. Yeah, lost it somewhere yesterday," I fibbed. "You gotta watch out for that, kid. Sunburn's no joke. Can even lead to skin cancer, you know." "Yeah, thanks. So what's in that bottle you got there?" "Oh, just something to soothe your skin. Trust me, you don't want to leave without it." The searing pain when I reached for the bottle confirmed his words. My skin had turned the color of a sunset and felt as scorching as the sun itself. Funny thing is, I did apply sunscreen multiple times throughout the day, and I'm not someone who burns easily. When we were at the camp, I felt perfectly fine. Well, before whatever happened that sent me running in terror. Chris and Robbie were waiting for me outside, their faces etched with solemn expressions. They had all our gear packed up, tents, leftover drinks, you name it. My heart sank when they informed me they'd discovered Rachel's tent empty in the morning, along with mine. A search team had been called in to scour the woods for any sign of where she might have gone, but their efforts had been in vain so far. Though I had a gut feeling they wouldn't find any trace that she had ever been there, except for her tent and belongings. Robbie insisted on staying behind to assist with the search, while Chris and I embarked on the journey back home. The leather seats in Chris's car were an agonizing discomfort, clinging to my clammy, sunburned skin at the slightest contact. I didn't have the energy to complain, though. We arrived back at my house and called Robbie with waning hope, which, for me, had already evaporated completely. Unsurprisingly, there was still no news. Rachel was never located. Even after expanding the investigation to multiple jurisdictions, any leads the police might have had soon went cold. I haven't divulged this to my friends, but I now understand that Rachel is undoubtedly lost forever to something beyond our comprehension. After all, how could they believe me, given our drug use that night? Grieving is one thing, but grieving when you can't tell the truth about what transpired is a whole different ordeal. While changing my clothes that day, I noticed something peculiar. My blue polo no longer featured the embroidered brand logo on its left breast as it once did. The implications of what might have occurred if I had stuck around any longer still send shivers down my spine. I've distanced myself from that lifestyle, to be honest. I still hang out with those friends, but on the wildest nights, I never go beyond drinking or smoking, usually not both. It's probably for the best anyway. Those words still haunt my thoughts. This one, were they referring to me? I don't have any rational explanation for what happened that night, who those entities were, their motives. Needless to say, the image of that pale sun unfurling itself is permanently etched into my memory. All I can say now is that if the sun ever stops setting and hangs there like a glazed-over eye, don't stick around to witness it crack open. Don't be courageous or inquisitive. Just get as far away as you can from wherever you find yourself, or be taken to a place our minds were never meant to comprehend. Some of us, no matter how much we achieve in life, will always have that nagging feeling that we somehow stumbled into our success. No matter how skilled, knowledgeable, or competent you are, this self-doubt eats away at you, slowly eroding any confidence you may have. I discovered, rather belatedly, that this phenomenon is commonly referred to as imposter syndrome. According to various studies and research papers, it can be a healthy thing when managed properly. Unlike its counterpart, Dunning-Kruger syndrome, it acts as a self-regulating mechanism to prevent excessive overconfidence. However, when left unchecked, it can lead to issues and exacerbate existing ones. Being a successful woman in a male-dominated industry, imposter syndrome took a toll on me. It led to self-doubt, which resulted in insomnia. Insomnia, in turn, deepened the self-doubt, paving the way for depression. The toxic combination of workplace paranoia, isolation, and a constant exposure to a pervasive undercurrent of sexism and boys' club culture fueled that depression until it fully manifested as psychosis. In the end, I suffered a very public and highly embarrassing mental breakdown at work. When I received my walking papers from the firm, I went home and downed all the pills in my medicine cabinet until the sheer weight of them made me nauseous. Ironically, a Jehovah's Witness happened to see me through the front window, lying in a puddle of foamy vomit, and dialed for an ambulance. After having my stomach pumped and being discharged from the hospital, my family had me placed in psychiatric care, where I spent the next 18 months battling my inner demons with the assistance of various medications. Eventually, they couldn't keep me any longer and released me. However, I had no home, no money, and certainly no job. The stigma of being a mental health patient appeared to be as severe, if not worse, than having a criminal record. At least with ex-convicts, I overheard a man say outside a cafe, "You know they've served their time and probably learned their lesson." With mentally unstable people, you never know when it's all going to resurface, but you know it will. In due course, I managed to secure a job as a night shift cleaner, and my fractured life began to regain some semblance of normalcy. It wasn't all monotony and tedium. Once I had scraped together enough cash for the cheapest smartphone available, I managed to acquire a pair of noise-canceling headphones through less than legal means. Those, combined with a few gigs of pirated music, made my work a bit more tolerable. Another thing that kept my mind engaged was the buildings themselves. Our crew often tackled old government and former government buildings, constructed atop even older structures. I'd wrap up my tasks as quickly as possible, then devote my remaining 40 minutes to exploring the basements of these ancient sites. Even though I often lacked swipe card, made it a breeze to locate the IT department and subsequently acquire a contractor's access underneath those old buildings. I might not be an urban explorer, but I stumbled upon items. My dulled emotional responses allowed me to process expect from poking around dusty government crypts in the dead of night. My narrow corridor of the mirrored walls. The floor consisted of old, polished wood, and one entire wall was cut with mice. Stained children's ballet shoes lay in another corner. I surmised that government employees. The dwarf shaft, the broken church, and the string hallway. Back to the surface when I came up featuring a candle holder containing a single aged candle. I opened it to examine its 2 sulfur-tipped matches, a flint, and a D-shaped piece of iron, the striker. My pipes, there was no cell signal whatsoever. It turned out iron and flint caused it to sulfur blue flame to the candle's wick. Holding my newfound light aloft beside me, Such a door had seen with such a dark luster was ebony, far too rare and costly to be found in decaying basements. A gentle touch sent the door gliding smoothly open, its whispering sound echoing over polished concrete on the other side, where an unadorned corridor extended into the darkness, as straight as a laser beam. Curiosity overtook me, and without a second thought, I embarked on the first of the black paths. The hallway stretched out for maybe a kilometer, then terminated with another black door, identical to the first one. A gentle push, and it swung open, and with a strange sense of excitement, I recognized that I stood in the dimly lit boiler room beneath my shabby apartment building. Yet this couldn't be right, as my apartment was a good 90-minute train ride away from my workplace. When I flicked on the boiler room lights, the candle's flame vanished into thin air, and so did the door. What in the world had I stumbled upon? It didn't take me long to decipher its operation. With the tinderbox and candle, I could bring the door into existence and save myself the daily 3-hour commute. Consequently, I could sleep in, waste time online, enjoy breakfast at a budget-friendly cafe, or simply sit somewhere and read. For the first time since my infamous mental breakdown and subsequent institutionalization, my life seemed to be improving. My colleagues and boss noticed the change in my demeanor, and I received more responsibilities. However, amidst these positive developments, I made another crucial discovery. The tinderbox worked in multiple locations. There were doors beneath other buildings as well, all leading back to my apartment. No matter where I ventured, a short walk led me through those eerie, deserted corridors, and during my breaks, I started using them to return home for some personal time. You might wonder why masturbation, of all things? Well, as my confidence grew, my medication dosage decreased. With fewer drugs in my system, my libido roared back to life. I'd also observed that the lifeless concrete hallways had changed slightly. They were no longer still and empty, as a faint breeze coursed through them, seemingly hurrying my journey home to my laptop and vibrator. I believe for the first time in years, I was actually enjoying life. And it was bound to get even better. My promotion to shift manager meant more income, primarily directed toward indulging in a vice I had neglected for a long time: food. Being impoverished limited my culinary choices. Rice had been my staple for so long that I instinctively ignored most supermarket aisles. Then, during one of my treks through the chilly tunnel of the tinderbox, thinking about groceries and delicious luxuries, I emerged in a new location: the ancient, decaying basement of a supermarket warehouse. Chilled from my journey through the tunnel, which had taken longer than usual, I gazed at the colossal crates and pallets of foodstuffs surrounding me, basked in the flickering glow of the unceasing candle. It doesn't take a genius to guess what I did next. I loaded up on as many indulgences as I could carry, and over the next few days, I made numerous return trips until my cupboards overflowed. The freedom from grocery expenses was worth any minor inconvenience. Off my medication entirely, I joined a gym and embarked on shedding the excess weight that had accumulated on my body. Ambition. I believed the tinderbox had been granted to me as a gift from some otherworldly force, a form of compensation for the suffering I had endured. Mastering the manipulation of the darkened passageways came effortlessly. With the return of my old sharpness and cleverness, I yearned to regain my former lifestyle. I knew I might never earn a 6-figure salary again, but I could at least live like it. Through the faintly shimmering concrete and oddly warm walls of the tunnels, I discovered gloomy warehouse basements teeming with clothing, makeup, jewelry, footwear, and expensive beauty products. I felt like a human embodiment of fantastic mystery. But one fateful night, a light appeared in the tunnel from the opposite direction, and everything changed. I dashed away from the light, convinced it was some security guard who had uncovered my secret, forcefully swung the ebony door shut, and extinguished the wick. A faint curse echoed in the distance just before the door faded into nothingness. I refrained from using the tunnels for nearly a month. I opened the tinder box and peered inside, greeted each time by the same sight. A few coils of hemp, some smelly touch paper, 2 sulfur matches, and a flint and steel. Determinedly, I lit the candle, closed the box, and pushed open the black door, venturing down the corridor. The distant light, bobbing in the darkness, initially sent shivers of fear down my spine. But then I spotted a detail I had missed before. It was the same faint bluish light as that from my own candle. Intrigued, I approached the source, a sense of exhilaration creeping up my spine as each step brought our meandering, flickering flames closer together. Before me stood a man, dressed as smartly as I was, but his eyes were hollow and bleary from exhaustion. "Oh God, help me," he cried out. "I can't find the door. These tunnels seem endless. Please, get me out of here." In his trembling hand, he clutched a tinder box identical to mine, but his candle had nearly burned out. Mine remained almost as fresh as the day I discovered it. With a snarl of desperation, he lunged for my candle, grabbing it from my startled fingers. Then he bolted, leaving his tinder box at my feet. I chuckled at his futile escape attempt because there was nowhere to go. It was a straight corridor, and in his weary state, he had no hope of outrunning me. But when the flame on his discarded tinder box sputtered out, I felt a fear like never before. Dim golden orange light began seeping through the heated walls. They grew thinner, as if the stone was becoming insubstantial, and something sought to break through. Distant cries of agony resonated through the ever-changing corridor, and with a dreadful certainty that something had gone horribly awry, I sprinted for my life. When I caught up with the man in my tinder box, he stumbled and wept. I snatched the light from his grasp and shoved him to the ground. "You can't evade it forever," he said. "Once you venture deep enough, you can't find your way back. Then the candle will burn out, and you'll be damned to Sheol forever." He knelt there, sobbing and shaking his head. A pool of golden light radiated around him on the scorching stone floor. "What's happening?" I stammered, the words trembling off my tongue. "The inevitable," he replied. Then hands of molten gold surged from a circle, pulling him through the floor with a horrifying hiss as superheated metal met human flesh. With one final, wordless cry of anguish, the man vanished. I sincerely attempted to cease using the tinder box. Cut off from my primary sources of pleasure, my mood darkened and depression reared its ugly head once more. I vowed to use the tinder box sparingly, to minimize my time on the black paths. But despite the gold-drenched, anguished face of the man etched in my memory, I couldn't resist. Anger welled up at my own weakness, frustration and irrationality consumed me. My candle remained whole and barely depleted. For all I knew, it might last a lifetime. Perhaps when the man found his, it was already on the verge of running out, and he recklessly wasted it exploring endless, improbable pathways. It was during this time that I began to notice the words etched into the tunnel walls. They were not in English, and given the technology freeze on the black paths, I had to copy them by hand and attempt translation on the surface. I soon discovered they were written in Hebrew, and when I brought a Hebrew dictionary with me to decipher them, they chilled me more than any threat of institutionalization or public meltdown. According to the narrative inscribed on the walls, I was condemned. "You cannot cease using it beyond the 4th circle," the words warned me. "It's worse than any addiction, more insidious than any vice ever conceived. The tinder box can offer you anything you desire, except escape from the black paths of Sheol." The writing continued, delving into immortal souls and eternal damnation before finding clarity again. And eventually, the doors will cease to appear, the flame will extinguish, and the black path will fade, dragging you to your final resting place in the appropriate circle of hell. After you're gone, the tinderbox will gradually resurface, seeking another to corrupt and commencing its cycle anew. I remember sitting there in shock, reading the final lines. But I have learned through another I met on the paths that if you carry the tinderbox down, as far down as possible, to the final circle, it will be imprisoned there forever. Thus I, Rabbi Lemuel, will bear this cursed tinderbox into the depths of hell, to the very throne of Satan. In doing so, I am certain I'll condemn my immortal soul to eternal suffering. Yet it must be done. May the Lord accept this humble sacrifice to save the countless souls who might have followed in my footsteps. I pray with all that I have left that you do the same. The tinderbox now rests on the bedside table, worn and seemingly harmless. I haven't used it in 2 weeks, but it gnaws at my mind, flooding my thoughts with fantasies of boundless luxuries, justified retribution, delightful perversions, and tempting betrayals. It tells me I could reclaim my old life. It insists that I can avoid the fate of both the gold-round man and Rabbi Lemuel, for I am different, I am superior to all others. So here I sit, holding the strikerd in my hand, a sulphur match at the ready. I can only hope that I can reach the final circle of hell before the flame dies out. The night unfurled its inky cloak, and the forest whispered dread as I ventured deep within, a chilling welcome to the abyss. In our first story, someone dials Boothworld Industries and gets a real person, Samantha. The operator schedules remodeling and asks for payment in the form of a daughter, leading to a horrifying twist. And the second, a childhood box fort, leads to eerie events. Dog disappears, strange tunnel inside. Reality distorts. Chasing the inexplicable, fear takes hold. Listen carefully and tell me if you feel scared to get this bash started. Like many of you, I dialed that number for Boothworld Industries. Before I made the call, I went through the responses in the thread. I like knowing what's gonna go down before it does. I suppose I'm kinda dull like that. Still, it gave me a rush to punch in that number and hit the call button, even though I had the whole scoop. I was on the landline and made sure to block my deets, just to be on the safe side. But then something went screwy. You guys all got a voicemail, but I got a real live person. Welcome to Boothworld Industries. I'm Samantha, and I'm the operator today. Name? I was stuck at this point. I didn't know what to say. I was expecting some pre-recorded message, like the rest of you got, maybe even that weird text. I never saw a real person coming. I freaked out and hung up the phone. 5 seconds later, when it rang again, I hightailed it out of the house to scoop up my daughter, Ariana, from school. On the way back, my cell started buzzing. Ariana's all about that hands-free phone in our car. She likes to grab it and pretend she's in a spaceship, talking to a Cylon or something. I blame my husband's constant Battlestar Galactica watching for that. Mummy? Ariana asked, "Can I hit the button?" "Sure," I said. "Just do it quick before the light changes." Ariana unbuckled her seatbelt and reached between the front seats to tap the button that'd answer the call. "Hello," she said after waiting for the beep that told you the phone had picked up. I heard the same voice from before, cold, almost robotic. "Welcome to Boothworld Industries. I'm Samantha, and I'm the operator today. Name?" Everything stopped for me right then. The light, but I sat there, staring at my steering wheel. / no fright, but come out okay in the end. A place where you live out your fears. That lady's voice on the other end of that phone ain't safe at all. "Mommy?" Ariana added to Booth World Industries. I'm Samantha, and I'm the operator today. Name? I didn't say nothing. I hung up the phone and drove the rest of the way home. Ariana looked up at me as we walked up the driveway. Was that a Cylon? I put on a smile, even though it felt like someone had stabbed my gut, and it was still twisting in there. Nah, sweetheart, I said. Cylons ain't real. My little girl gazed at me, her brow all wrinkled, and she frowned. That broke my heart. It was the first time I'd lied to her. Nah, it wasn't a Cylon on the other end of that line, but there was something missing in that Booth World operator's voice. Something shattered. Ariana a cereal bowl and took it to her room. I turned on SpongeBob SquarePants for her to watch, and I knew what needed to be done. I entered the Booth World Industries number into my cell. As I held the phone to my ear, there was someone breathing on the other end. I didn't even hear it ring. Hello? I inquired. Name? My mouth went dry. I was aware of my duty. Janice Hoffman, I replied. Janice was my boss at work. Though her voice brought to mind Fran Drescher, her wandering hands reminded me more of that shady boss from Disclosure. On the line, I could hear Samantha vigorously tapping away on the keyboard. It seemed like she was wearing one of those. She confirmed. Remodeling is set for January 14, 2022. Would you like to reschedule? Yes, I agreed. We've got an opening on Monday. That's fine. Would you prefer a courtesy call? I'd wanted no part in listening to someone. All right. On Monday, the 13th, we've got Janice Hoffman scheduled for remodeling. Fine. Mrs. Jacobs? Yes. How do you want to handle payment for this? What the heck was she talking about? The original story never mentioned anything about payment. Payment? I questioned. Yes, Mrs. Jacobs. When you schedule a remodeling, the scheduling is final unless another member shifts the scheduled date. We expect payment in full before service is rendered. What's the cost? Ariana. The name lingered in the air. Ariana, I murmured. What do you mean? The price for the scheduled remodeling is your daughter, Ariana. If you don't pay, we'll have no choice but to repossess what's due. My blood turned to ice when she mentioned repossessing. I could sense her grin on the other end of the line. It was the first hint of emotion she'd shown so far. What's the difference between payment and repossession? I asked, closing my eyes. You can earn back some of the payment, at least parts of it, by referring new members. Unfortunately, all repossessions are final. Why are you doing this? Ma'am, you responded to our ad and called us. You contracted work on Janice Hoffman. Now we're at the payment stage. The cost of the work is your daughter, Ariana. You can't take her. Fantastic. Repossession is scheduled then. We at Booth World Industries appreciate it and welcome you to the club. Have a great day. I flinched when the phone made that clicking sound. I moved it away from my ear and just stared at it. If I hadn't felt like I was going to cry and throw up at the same time, I might have cracked up. Everything was insane. I was nuts. I stared at my cell's screen. The Booth World Industries number was still right there on the display. I dashed into Ariana's room. It was empty. Her cereal bowl sat on the towel I always put under her stuff in case she made a mess. In the bowl, there was a business card. I snapped a photo because I thought I was losing it, and I believed that card wouldn't stick around if I blinked. When I picked it up, it felt warm, like it was baking in the humidity. My skin crawled, and I dropped it. It landed face up in the bowl. I heard a roar outside, and managed to get there just in time to see a matte black Chevelle SS whip around the corner. I dialed 911. They sent a cop, and he got all my info. An Amber Alert went out. Then came the waiting. I felt desperate, so I checked //Boothworld, but the subreddit was private. A few hours later, I got a call. The number was from a 917 area code. "Hello," I said. "I already knew who'd be on the other end." "Ma'am, this is Samantha from Boothworld Industries again. Your courtesy call is starting now." I hung up. My cell started ringing again. 323 area code. I yanked the battery out of my cell. My landline started ringing. Caller ID showed an 832 area code. I didn't pick up. I unplugged the phone and sat there with my face in my hands. I couldn't even begin to comprehend what was happening. I just sat there and cried, feeling completely powerless. That's when the phone started ringing. My cell buzzed across the table, away from its battery, and my unplugged home phone rang louder than it ever had before. I got in my car and left. I went to Walmart and used a payphone to call the detective in charge of Ariana's case. His name was Stark. After what felt like an eternity on hold, Stark answered. "Mrs. Jacobs," he said. "Have you found her?" I asked. "No, but we traced the number. It was some kid's cell phone from a block over from your place. He swears he never made the call, but the carrier says otherwise. The kid said he dialed a number for, hold on a sec. Here it is, Boothworld Industries, on a site called Reddit." "Reddit," I corrected. "That's what I said. There's no record of Boothworld Industries anywhere. We're holding the kid, and I'll keep you posted if anything develops, all right." "Is that all?" I asked. "All I want is my daughter back." "Yes, ma'am. It's best to let us handle this, all right?" "Okay." "Good," Stark said. "We at the police department appreciate it, and feel free to call if you need to, but I'm sure we'll be in touch soon. You have a great day." I hung up, and the phone started ringing instantly. I picked it up, foolishly hoping it was Stark with an update. It wasn't. A male voice growled into my ear. "The scheduled work has been completed. We at Boothworld Industries appreciate it and welcome you to the club. //Boothworld is now open. Have a great day." The call ended, and I hung up the phone. I brought my hand up to my ear. It was warm with his breath. "EDIT, I made a mistake. Everything's fine. We at the Jacobs household appreciate it. Have a great day." All right, we all recall those cardboard fortresses from our youth, the ones that outshone any Fisher-Price playhouse, because we painstakingly cut them out, pieced them together with tape, and adorned them with our own hands. Unlike the fancy plastic cottages your folks splurged on, these could be endlessly modified and expanded with a dash of creativity on your part and a few cardboard boxes your neighbors were about to toss. If you were the fortunate kid to score a refrigerator box, your coolness was sealed, at least for a few weeks. Feeling nostalgic yet? Great. You're in the same mental zone I was before my cherished childhood memories of cardboard and duct tape took a dark turn. Now, my story. 3 years ago, my folks decided it was time to move. My sisters and I took this with a grain of salt because my folks are known for their disorganization, and none of their plans ever materialize without significant delays. But as it turned out, they soon commenced the renovations the house needed for selling. I was employed at a fairly popular clothing store at the time, and we routinely received 15 to 30 boxes of merchandise every weekday. These were sizable boxes that, once emptied, would inevitably end up in the trash. I brought some of them home and began stockpiling them in the basement, thinking they might come in handy if my folks were indeed serious about this move. One evening, after my sister gave me a lift home from work, we were lugging a few flattened boxes down to the basement, and I began reminiscing about the incredible box tunnel my cousins had created when we were kids. It stretched all through their basement with plenty of nooks and crannies, and we were allowed to paint it however we pleased. Naturally, we were occupied for months playing in that thing. With these memories in mind, I glanced at our growing pile of boxes, then at my sister, and vocalized an idea that I'm sure we were both pondering. "Casey," I said, "we could build an amazing box fort with these." Before you start questioning the mental capacity of my sisters and me, given that we could entertain ourselves with a box fort, let me clarify that it began mostly as a joke, and wouldn't it be hilariously absurd if we did this sort of thing? But yeah, we got really into it. We're a pretty creative family, so the construction was what we enjoyed. We didn't spend hours inside playing house or anything like that. We assembled it upstairs, the first 8 boxes serving as a tunnel connecting my sister's rooms, Taylor and Casey, with a small entrance to the bathroom and another tunnel branching off to my room. We grabbed Sharpies and adorned it to our heart's content, hung up amusing pictures inside, and Casey even strung some Christmas lights, which added a nice touch. Any 4-year-old would be proud to call this box fort their own. I brought home more boxes. We extended the tunnels, making them fancier and adding curves at the end, so when you were inside, you couldn't see an entrance unless you crawled all the way to the end. We even covered the whole thing with blankets to make it look better and to block out the light from the numerous gaps and openings throughout. Our dog, Juliet, was hesitant at first, but joined the Box Fort Club as soon as the 3 of us crawled inside to read ghost stories, because she didn't want to miss out. It was really dark in there. We usually brought flashlights, and nearly every time we crawled through, we burst into fits of laughter, mainly because we were 3 fully grown girls crawling through a box fort. I mentioned this just to emphasize that, despite the complete darkness and the cramped size, there was none of that overwhelming atmosphere of fear, foreboding, and malevolence that often accompanies eerie places. At that point, it was still entirely ordinary and amusing, though it would have been a challenge to convince one of us to crawl through it to get to the bathroom at night when the house was silent and everyone else was asleep. My folks understandably found the colossal obstruction in their hallway annoying, which they had to hop over to access their bedroom, the linen closet, and our bathroom. Still, they generally tolerated our antics and only threatened to dismantle it once or twice. Nevertheless, we decided we weren't satisfied with our box fort because we wanted to create an epic box fort. However, having already taken up the space in our bedrooms, the only remaining option was extending it across the hall to my parents' bedroom, something they'd never consent to while living in the house. Fortunately, they were going away for a week. That's when we filled every inch of free floor space in their bedroom and closet with box fort, and that's when the strange occurrences began. It happened progressively. We'd be in there, hanging up funny pictures or whatever, and then we'd hear a shuffling noise echoing down one of the numerous branching tunnels. Our assumption was that it was Juliet trying to locate us, but after calling her and searching, we'd discover she'd been lounging in a sunny spot on the couch for who knows how long. One time, Casey and I were inside hanging up paper bats we'd cut out, and we heard the shuffling from a distance. "Juliet, Julietta," I hollered. "It's not." "What are you talking about?" I said, baffled because her expression suddenly turned frightened. "It's not Julie. Taylor just took her for a walk. They're both gone." I stared at her for a moment, recalling Taylor shouting something about walking the dog not too long ago, and then we both scrambled toward the nearest exit. Once we were outside the fort, we immediately burst into fits of giggles, feeling absurd now that we were safe. "Do you think it's mice or something?" Casey asked, wrinkling her nose. I replied that I didn't think so. The store was pretty clean, and the house had never had mice. But there had to be another explanation. The noise came from the section that extended into my parents' closet, a big walk-in with a window overlooking the backyard. "The window's open in here." I bet it was just the breeze rustling the boxes. It was a perfectly logical explanation, one we were content to accept. That night, as I lay in bed, my gaze kept returning to the entrance of the fort. It was pitch dark in there, and something about having that wide black tunnel in my room made me feel extremely exposed. Eventually, I turned over and slept the other way, but I made a mental note to cover it up with a sheet the next day. On the second day without our parents, I used the grocery money to buy ingredients for a cookie decorating extravaganza. Casey and I were in the kitchen baking cookies while a movie played in the background, making it quite noisy. We didn't hear Taylor until she stood in the doorway, shouting at us. If I remember correctly, the conversation went something like this. "What the heck? Casey, what do you want?" Casey and I exchanged puzzled glances, and Taylor regarded us as if we were daft. "Are you kidding? I came all the way down here, and you don't even want anything." "Tay, we didn't call you." Casey did. I was on the laptop in my room, and she told me to join her in the box fort. "No, I didn't. I've been here baking cookies with Muse the whole time." "Oh, come on, Casey. You totally did. I heard you. And then when I went in, you left and came down here." At this point, with one sister irate and the other bewildered, I intervened and got the full story from Taylor. Apparently, she was in her room when she heard Casey calling her name from inside the box fort. She asked what Casey wanted, and Casey insisted that she come into the box fort. Annoyed, Taylor finally complied. However, she couldn't see Casey inside, and a moment later, she heard Casey laughing with me down in the kitchen, where Casey had always been. Needless to say, the atmosphere in the room shifted from warm and comfortable to incredibly eerie. I felt the need to step up as the big sister to reassure them. We argued for a while with the "you're lying" routine, but once both sides were convinced that the other was telling the truth, I volunteered to inspect the box fort while they waited outside, keeping a close watch on me. I'm a rational, level-headed person. When it comes to the supernatural and the paranormal, vampires, mermaids, you name it, but I won't buy into it until I see concrete scientific proof of its existence. At that time in my mind, such evidence hadn't. If it happened to be an intruder, well, what could they possibly do to me? With these thoughts in mind, I ventured into the fort. No vagabonds and no one else in the house. Somehow, I managed the illusion. We all settled down to enjoy cookies and watch a daytime incident, but both Casey and Taylor had trouble sleeping that night. In fact, I woke up in the middle of the night to Casey's anxious voice calling out, "Muse, Muse." "Parents," I leaped out of bed, grabbed my knife, and rushed to her room. To those of you who might be puzzled by the fact that I keep a knife in my bedside table drawer, remember that I'm a petted woman with little chance in darkness, and when I switched on the light, I found her sitting up in bed with wide-open eyes, looking on the verge of tears. Seeing nothing unusual, I demanded to know what was wrong. By then, Taylor had entered the room with Juliet in her arms. Casey explained that she had been sleeping when suddenly she awoke with the sensation that someone was in the room, watching her. She found herself staring at the entrance to the box fort. This sent a chill down my spine, as I had on the entrance, trying to quell her unease, when suddenly the boxes began to shake as if something inside them was moving rapidly away from her room. Apparently, that's when she started calling my name, waking up Taylor in the process. For the second time that day, I conducted a thorough search of the box fort and the entire house, but found nothing. I might have dismissed it as a dream if not for another strange incident the following day. Casey woke up an hour late for work because her alarm didn't go off. Her alarm had failed because her cell phone was missing, a phone she claimed to have placed beside her pillow before falling asleep. Taylor and I made an effort to help her find it before she left, scouring her bed and the floor, and even calling it from the home phone. However, none of us were particularly surprised or alarmed because Casey had a reputation for misplacing things. When Casey returned home that evening, I inquired whether her phone had been there when she woke us up in the middle of the night, but she couldn't recall seeing it. Nevertheless, she had been texting her friend in bed and had taken care to set the alarm and place it beside her. In the end, we decided to wait for it to turn up. Around 3 a.m, I was once again roused from my sleep, this time by some disturbance outside my room. Again, I grabbed my knife and was startled by the noise, but what I primarily felt was anger and irritation. I had had enough of all the drama and wanted to put an end to it. Juliet was in my parents' closet, barking loudly at the box fort. Casey and Taylor were already awake, as bewildered as me about what was happening. Taylor picked up the dog and carried her out of the room, and Juliet immediately fell silent. This left Casey and me standing in the closet, wearing bewildered expressions. It was quiet for a moment, and then suddenly, Katy Perry's Hot and Cold song blared out loudly and clearly, causing both of us to jump. "What the heck?" I exclaimed, still trying to wrap my half-asleep head around this. Normally, my sisters tease me when I swear, claiming that I don't do it properly, but this time, they seemed to think it was appropriate. "That's my ringtone," Casey said, giving me a strange look but not making any move to retrieve her phone. "Well, answer it," I urged, feeling exasperated. Casey lifted the blanket covering the entrance of the box fort, and there was her missing cell phone, lying in the middle of the first box, still playing the song from its inadequate speaker. She opened it and held it to her ear. "Hello?" I waited for a moment and then asked, "So, who is it?" Casey expressed her disgust and abruptly ended the call. "It's nothing, probably just our voices echoing in the background." "They must have hung up," she explained while crossing her arms. She then turned her suspicion toward me. "Why on earth would I steal your phone and wake all of us up at 3 a.m? I responded incredulously. Casey shifted her focus to Taylor. "I didn't touch your phone," Taylor exclaimed, a hint of fear in her expression. "Are you both messing with me? This isn't funny," Casey said, growing agitated. "You're really freaking me out." At this point, I could see the situation transitioning from strange to downright unsettling. I sighed and volunteered to once again search the entire house, emphasizing that Juliet might have taken the phone as a chew toy and left it in the box fort. It was the best explanation I could come up with at the time, although it didn't seem very plausible. After all, Juliet was missing most of her teeth, and the only things I had ever seen her play with were soft plush toys, slippers, and regrettably, dirty underwear. I know, cross. The idea of her having a cell phone in her mouth was hard to believe. Upon inspecting the house, I ensured that all the doors and windows were locked. Everything appeared to be secure, and we were safe. It seemed like one of those weeks where numerous minor incidents were adding up to a major headache. Before retiring for the night, I asked Casey if her phone displayed the caller ID for that particular call. "No, it just showed unknown. I can't figure out why we didn't hear it, though. It was so loud." "I don't know," I replied with a shrug, "and maybe you should change your ringtone." It was too late to delve into the matter further. The following day appeared to be uneventful. The 3 of us spent time at the beach near our house, leaving us in high spirits, joking about how we overreact to the slightest odd occurrences. Casey had plans to attend a party that night, so it was just Taylor and me at home. I sensed that Taylor was still feeling uneasy about the box fort, so I decided to make it enjoyable again. I didn't want another late-night wake-up call. I gathered a stack of old magazines, some scissors, and glue, suggesting that we create a college on one of the interior walls. We played some upbeat music and chatted about an upcoming family trip when Taylor suddenly lowered the volume as if listening intently. "What's up?" I inquired. "Did you put Juliet outside?" she asked, her expression one of confusion. "No, she's probably downstairs." "Why?" "I didn't let her out either, but I can hear her barking." "Well, maybe Casey did before she left," I said cheerfully. "Let's go check." For the record, I couldn't hear anything, but Taylor had always been more attuned to Juliet than I was. When we searched the backyard, Juliet was nowhere to be found, and there was no barking to be heard. I could sense that Taylor was growing anxious. She had a deep affection for that dog. Meanwhile, I was becoming increasingly frustrated. Juliet didn't respond when we called her, so we had no choice but to search the house once again. We checked all her usual hiding spots, but there was no sign of her until we reached the upstairs area, hopping over the box fort to inspect closets and bedrooms. Suddenly, Taylor stood upright and told me to shh. "I hear her again," she whispered, prompting me to listen carefully. "I don't hear anything," I said after a few moments. "Can't you hear her barking? It sounds like she's far away." "Are you sure it's not another dog? We didn't let her out." "No, it's definitely her," Taylor insisted, moving toward my parents' closet to listen at the window. "Come here. It's louder in here. She must be outside." When I reiterated that I couldn't hear anything, she rolled her eyes and retorted, "You must be deaf," before heading downstairs to grab her shoes. We scoured the night for our dog, a 4-hour quest, both on foot and in a car. Later, we brought Casey in for assistance. My heart remained in my throat throughout the entire ordeal, dreading the possibility of discovering something dreadful on the roadside and wondering how I could console two girls who adored Juliet as if she were their child, especially since nothing terrible had ever occurred in their lives before. There was also an unsettling unease related to that distant dog barking, but I set that aside for the time being. The following day was filled with anxious efforts, creating posters and displaying them while canvassing the neighborhood. My poor sisters were on the verge of tears, and I couldn't help but wonder why this had to happen while our parents were away. By nightfall, they had settled down to watch a movie with only half-hearted interest, waiting for a call. I, on the other hand, retired upstairs to quietly call my mom and ask her to come home earlier. I didn't know what would become of our dog, but I knew I needed some assistance in comforting my sisters. When I eventually retired to bed, the house was serene. My sisters had secured the house, extinguished the lights, and were asleep. I grew bored with my book, unable to sleep, and much like a few nights prior, I found it impossible to divert my gaze from the entrance to the box fort. I had covered it with a blanket as I had planned earlier, and while that seemed to provide some comfort, I still felt uneasy. At some point, I scolded myself silently, thinking, "This is foolish. I'm going to sleep." I prepared to roll over to the other side when something caught the corner of my eye. The blanket covering the entrance moved slightly, as if stirred by a passing breeze. This was strange because all the windows had been closed when we switched on the air conditioning the previous day. I watched intently now, trying to determine in the dim light if the blanket was actually moving, as if someone were breathing beneath it, or if it was merely my imagination. It wasn't a figment of my imagination. As I watched, something inside touched the blanket with a single slender finger and traced a vertical path down to the bottom. I'm not particularly courageous, but something changes when you're responsible for the safety of others. Suddenly, frightening things don't paralyze you with fear, because you know you have to be brave for the people you care about. In this moment, my brain could only process the most logical explanation. I turned on the light, got out of bed quietly, and softly called out, "Juliet." Receiving no response, I prepared to step forward when the boxes suddenly trembled as if something were moving through them. I admit I jumped, and my heart began racing. But I also remembered that we hadn't actually checked inside the box fort amidst all the commotion. Picking up the flashlight that lay on the floor near the entrance, I knelt down and lifted the cover, shining my light inside. The tunnel leading from my bedroom was empty. However, I couldn't see around the corners. "Juliet," I called, keeping my voice down so as not to wake my sisters. I repeated, "Juliet," using that stern, commanding tone. Finally, I heard a faint whimper, reminiscent of her puppy days, and a shuffling noise moving further away from me. I cursed under my breath. Beyond all the associations of a creepy box fort in the middle of the night, all I could think about was my little dog, possibly hurt and frightened. I wanted to reach her before my sisters did, to assess the damage, if any. Things could quickly spiral out of control with them if Juliet was in bad shape. So, heroism triumphing over cowardice, I got on my hands and knees with the flashlight and entered. Inside, it was eerily silent, the type of silence that makes you feel as if your ears are stuffed with cotton, but you can hear your own breath clearly. As I advanced through the tunnel, I first looked right, toward my sister's rooms, but saw nothing. Then I looked left, and I heard shuffling, catching the tail end of something black as it